Mm. Hello and good evening, everybody. How is everyone doing? What is going on? Good to have everybody in the house. Rather late organized live stream. I say late. I wasn't sure if I was going to do it because kind of had other things, other priorities in the offing, but it had been a while since we'd last congregated, so I thought, let me organize a live stream. What's up, everybody? How's everyone doing? What's going on? Wildflower, Baker Boy, Kofi, Wagwan, the Black Sea Producky, um, Kroifadas, Mussy. How is everybody doing? It's great to have you here, and it's nice to be broadcasting to a relatively, broadcasting to people. I did my last live broadcast. Oh, why did my screen go black there? I'm on. See, this is the issue. I've got, for some weird reason, I've got those internet problems seem to be happening again. I hope it doesn't happen on this live stream, and it does kind of prevent me from wanting to live screen when I get those internet issues. I don't know what's going on because my internet at home seems to be fine, seems to be really strong, but you know, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I hope it doesn't persist. It's really annoying. But it's good to have you all here. Science and Inspiration, Katrina. Lovely to see you all here joining me. Let me know if they persist because I don't always know. I'm kind of the last person to know if the internet is blacking in and blacking out. I don't know if it's the case. So let me know if we have any issues. I hope not. We'll see. You know, it's 9:30 here in the UK. But Hervé, how you doing? I did want to do a live stream because aside from the topic that we're going to cover today, I actually do have some quite exciting news that I need to deliver to you guys. And so for those of you who dared to join me today, even though I didn't mention it, this live stream is going to be a bit of a big deal in terms of my trajectory. Some of you might know the surprise. Some of you might be able to spoil this if you're basically a part of my members only. Patrina, yeah, I like Patrina. If you're basically part of my, if you're one of my members of my either my Patreon or my YouTube memberships, I did give them a bit of priority notice in terms of this update. But today's the day when I'm going to let everybody know. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. That's not coming until the end of the live stream. So if you want to know what that news is, though, you're going to have to stick around until the end, where I'm going to reveal all. But today's live stream, I'm not going to lie to you. I did clickbait you all just a bit with this thumbnail. I did clickbait you all a little bit because I made in the thumbnail, I made it look and sound like I've come across this cracking new data, you know, this cracking new insight that's going to provide something. In reality, this live stream is going to be a bit of a watch back. Yeah, it was clickbait. Sorry. Sorry, Wildflower. It was clickbait. It's going to be a watch back, but it's also a watch back that I've been planning to do for a little while now. It's a watch back of the video I done on. I hope I haven't done it already. So as I'm saying that, I'm now thinking, have I done this already? But I'm sure I planned to, but never did it. It's I wanted to watch the Tutankhamun video. Well, as I'm saying that, I feel like I might have done a watch back of that already. that would be a little bit of that would be a little bit rubbish. I'm not watching back again. I feel like I did go through my lives just to double check. I clickbaited myself. I need to double check now, but I don't feel like, I feel like I had it planned, I had it in the offing, and then it never happened. And I wanted to do a watch back of that for some time now, but now I'm saying it, I'm like, have I watched that back already? I don't think I have. Oh, blah blah blah. What a cheek. I'm just looking. No, I haven't. I haven't. There you go. I haven't watched it back already. Okay, cool. So it's all good. It's all good. Um, oh, that's a really nice comment. Someone just left a really nice comment. I'm gonna have to put it on the screen. Thank you for that. It says, "Sorry, King. Everything you do is click worthy, so technically you can't, you don't or can't make clickbait content." Oh, that's really kind. Thank you very much. I like that. That's made me feel really good, really good. And I think just looking back now, actually, I don't think. Actually, you're going back a bit further now, and I think there's potential. No, Bantu. No, that's not it. I just realised when I looked back, I maybe didn't look back far enough. That would be a real. Hello. And now my YouTube is not working. I'm gonna do one quick check. All right. Hey Macy, don't worry about that. You work away, and whilst you're working away, I'll work out if we've done this before, because we're not doing Groundhog Day. Okay, we are not doing Groundhog Day. So let me just quickly switch. This will take me not long, guys. Promise you, this take me like I just have to double check that I haven't done this. I'm normally quite good with what I've done and what. Oh, 1 second. No, that's not it. No, I haven't done this watch back. Oh, thank goodness for that. Okay, so I haven't done this watch back before. Okay, this is going to be a watch back of my Was Tutankhamun Black video. There's a reason I'm doing this watch back specifically. In fairness, I think, and in fact, let me just do a quick survey. Put a 1 in the chat if you've seen that video. I think most of you, if not all of you, would have seen it, to be honest with you. But I don't want you to switch off because of that. But put a 1 in the chat if you've watched that video. The video that's titled Was Tutankhamun Black. Just put a 1 in the chat if you've seen it and if you recall it quite well. Okay. So like I suspected, that's a few of us so far. Considering there's 80 of us in here. Great. Okay. So it's a good number of us, a good handful of us have seen it, which is absolutely fine. But there's a reason why that I'm watching this video back specifically. There's a couple of reasons. One, it's not incredibly long, so it should be a relatively quick watch back. 2, it's quite thorough. And in that, I don't think there'll be massive amounts to add to it. Although I do want to leave it open for discussion. So I do want to leave it open for discussion, and I do want to leave it open for input for you guys. So I want this to be a chance for us to interact with the data that is being laid, that's being presented. And thirdly, because it links to the announcement that I have as well. So I kind of need you guys to play along with this, because I think it will be worthwhile. Which gave our justice system assault, hush money for Prince Andrew. Okay, Baker Boy, I've read your comment. I'm not sure where I can squeeze that one in though. Not sure how relevant it is to the discussion. Unless you want to draw the link, make it make sense to me so that I can see where that fits in. But either which way, thanks for informing that. Yeah, cool. All right, so I think that's fine. I'm happy with the response from you guys. We've got to watch this video together. Like I said, there's got to be purpose behind it. I like this video personally, which I know sounds a little bit conceited considering it's my own material. But there's a reason I like this video, because I feel like the race of the ancient Egyptians thing seems to always be the domain of people who aren't African, who aren't black, chiming in and then giving everyone their opinion. And if you've noticed something, they never just answer the questions, what race were the ancient Egyptians? Or they never say, were the ancient Egyptians like modern Egyptians? They always come in from the angle of, were the ancient Egyptians black? Have you noticed that? That's always their angle of attack. Yeah, it's always this focus on, were they black? And it's, it kind of tells you where their thoughts lie when they're making their content, because if they're out there to disprove, if they weren't out there to disprove the blackness, then black wouldn't be mentioned. It's a bit like all of the studies that Johannes Krauss, all the genetic studies that he publishes, he always finds a way of making sub-Saharan Africans the focal point, regardless of what part of the world he's kind of testing and sampling. He makes sub-Saharan Africans the focal points, and this is just another example of this obsession with blackness, which to me is just more of a confirmation that they knew they were black, that people who make these videos know that they're black, which is quite interesting, so there you go. But yeah, this is what's out there. I mean, Bamboo's just said Metatron just dropped another video with proof. What, the ancient Egyptian race video? I hope he didn't, because he knows I'll be coming straight for that jugular. So I hope he's staying off that topic. But let's see what he does there. Okay, cool. If he's at it again, I'll be at him again. No diddy. Don't worry about that. I'll be responding post haste. See what new arguments he raises. Let's see. Anyway, that being said, one of the reasons why I like this video, like I mentioned, is because I feel like the point of attack that I came from was to, first of all, empower ourselves, and for us to answer the question, were the ancient Egyptians black? Because we really should be the only ones posing that question. People who aren't black, I don't really understand their motive for asking if they were black or if they weren't. I don't understand where it is. Secondly, you'll notice that the angle of discussion that I approach in this video is multifaceted. It's multi-tiered. I came from a kind of a multi-academic approach, and I did this deliberately because anyone who's been subscribed to this channel for any time will know that our evidence isn't clustered into a single area like it is with the dissenters. So the people who are trying to disprove the blackness of the Egyptians always focus on kind of one thing. So for instance, and they always kind of like neglect a whole bunch of data that contradicts them. So for instance, if they're going to use the artwork, the people who use the artwork, they'll use 5 or 6 artworks that they can pass off as Eurasian, and then ignore thousands, literally thousands. We're out here making reconstructions of pharaohs and queens, characters right the way through Old, Middle and New Kingdom, based on multiple sculptures. They're finding disparate single artifacts, of people who aren't even royal, some people who don't even have names, scribe, and they'll base the whole entire race of the Egyptians based on a single statue that they've pulled up from somewhere, or a statue that looks nothing like other statues. For instance, Rahotep, whose statue looks completely divergent. His fake statue looks completely divergent from his other artworks, which should straight away tell you that there's something wrong with this because it's inconsistent. Or Nefertiti, for instance, who we have a plaster cast mold of her face, sitting next to a plaster cast mold of Akhenaten's face in the Louvre. I, as a reconstruction artist, I'm happy to use her plaster cast mold, but they're not happy to use that. They have to use the Berlin bust, which is not a plaster cast mold, and by the way, once again, like every other piece of artwork they fall on, seems to break every single convention that was ever set in ancient Egyptian art. So they literally continuously fall on statues that have very, very questionable origins, and which can be really easily, brought to task and disproven, you know, by just asking very, very basic questions. Why did they do this in this case and they've never done this before? Why does it look like it was painted yesterday and shows no signs of degradation after 4,500 years, etc., etc., etc.? These are the things that they have to do to support their lame arguments. And then when they inevitably, well, I would say they lose those arguments, but they don't even engage us in those arguments. They just kind of like they fall back on trolling and just, you know, being, you know, just avoiding any form of kind of like academic discourse back and forth. They just kind of like resort to trolling. And then when they fail in that area, then they go to other more obscure areas like DNA and genetics, where they can make interpretations as suits their whim. You know, they can find a European or group of Europeans carrying a marker that's also carried in Africa and then say, oh no, it's a European marker and we're going to call ourselves European based on this. You know, it's just, these are the number of, you know, things that they'll do to try and write themselves into an African civilization that presented as an African civilization, and everything they did was African. You know, this is what they do. But we have more evidence. We have far more evidence. And a lot of the evidence that we have, I've placed, or at least a lot of the evidence. In fact, I would say what I've placed in this video, the video you're about to see, is really the evidence that has stood out to me over the time or over the years that I've been doing this. This is not even like a tiny fraction. I would say this is even 5% of the quote unquote Afrocentric argument. I'm presenting a really small amount of the argument here, a tiny amount. But I like these arguments because I've focused on the field of anthropology, physical anthropology, and art. These are the areas of study that really stood out to me. And these are the areas of study that I felt that I had the requisite knowledge to be able to speak on with a degree of confidence and competence. So that's why I focused on these. There are loads of other areas. I mean, I picked up the African Origins of Civilization by Sheikh Anta Diop today. I picked that up again because I pick up, you know, periodically. And that's like 5 pages in. I was like, my brain was overwhelmed with how thorough and how comprehensively he proved everything that needed to be proven about the race of the Egyptians. Just so many. You'll never find a Euro/Arab-centric book that is as dense as that book in terms of the weight of arguments. You'll never find a video that is as dense as the one that I'm about to present to you, Was Tutankhamun Black? You won't find those. You won't find them. They don't have the ability to make them because they don't have the weighting of anthropological and, you know, historic, whatever stream of historiography you want to, you know, attack. They just don't have the weight of evidence. They don't have the cultural. They don't have the linguistic. They don't have the physical. They don't have any of the data. And so they rely on just crumbs. And it's just, it baffles me that they continue to try, to be honest with you. It's like, it would just be better. And here's the interesting thing before I start the video, and I will do, because this is my opening rants, as you know, I like to do. Here's the interesting thing. If you meet modern Egyptologists, yeah, and I'm not talking about general anthropologists or, you know, crackpot geneticists like Krauss. I'm talking about modern Egyptologists, and you ask them, what race were the ancient Egyptians? Do you know most modern Egyptologists now will just say, yeah, they were black. That's like a vast majority of them. Smash Rockwell has got a really good compilation of basically 10 of the, 10 top tier modern current Egyptologists back to back, all saying the ancient Egyptians were black. They all say it. They literally, it's like, they don't even argue about it anymore. It's kind of like, it's silly to argue. It's like the weight of evidence is too strong. We're not able to draw strong differentiation between them and the Nubians and the Kushites. So then what's the point in us trying to? They were just culturally aligned with these African, you know, these African people. And that's it. That's really the end of the argument. But there you go. Let me give a quick shout out to, I'm not sure, does that say Kimmy? I can't read your second character there. I'm really sorry. Anyone know of any black people teaching hieratic demotic? Try Smash Rockwell's channel. He does a lot of textual analysis, I want to say. Does a lot of reading of text. Is really good. I've got a few basic videos that will get you from some of the basic some of the basic phonemes in hieroglyphic to hieratic, but no more than that. But if you want to kind of like go a little bit deeper in your teaching, I suggest you check out Smash Rockwell's channel. He does live streams, and ask him a question live. And him and his entire crew are really well schooled in the area. They read directly from like the TLA, which is the tool that's used for basically, you know, sourcing scripts and finding out where certain words and characters have been used, and then reading old texts. So they're very, very well schooled. So check them out. Very, very good. And a lovely, humble and knowledgeable fellow Smash Rockwell is. So you'll be very honored to get his time. I've got to be totally honest with you. So there you go. Let me get started now, because I think I've given enough of an intro. So we're going to dive straight in. For those of you who've seen this before, I hope you don't find this boring. But like I said, stick around, because we've got some news. If you're just joining, I've just announced that we are going to be diving into some interesting news following this live stream. So please, well, as a part of this live stream at the end. So please do not disappear. Okay. All right. Got to pull back. Got a full screen. Bada boom. And I'm actually, no, I'm going to take off the screen because I've got to make sure the audio is there. No, remove. Stop screen. There we go. And let me minimize that, because I don't like seeing my face all full screen like that. It's disturbing. There you go. Spell. Present share screen. Okay, you know how this goes, guys. I'm gonna play this video, and when it starts playing, I just want you to put a 1 in the chat if you can hear the audio, okay? Or 2 if there's an issue with the audio when it starts playing, or if you can't hear it. If I see the 1s, I'm just going to let it play and then stop when it's supposed to stop. Ooh, just dropped my mouse. That's annoying. Okay, didn't lose everyone there. Great. Let's have a look. Efioma says, has anyone seen Kapruki's new video about the Moors? Guys, if you're not subscribed to Kapruki, first of all, do yourself a favor and just subscribe to that channel. I'm going to say this right now. I'm not just saying this because he's a friend of mine, and he is a friend of mine, but I'm not saying this because of this. I think he has my favorite channel on YouTube. He doesn't have many videos, but every time he drops a video, I am so pleased to be a part of his journey, even a very small part of his journey, because this young creator is brilliant. I love everything that he does on his channel, honestly. I love his scripts. I love his research. I love his approach to very controversial and very controversial, and some would say troubling topics that a lot of people would want to avoid. He's amazing. subscribe to his channel and watch his videos. I'm telling you right now, it'll be the best. It'll be the best thing you've done. That's the best referral I can give you. Really, really good. Don't block Volta unless she starts spamming. Volta says Egypt was Sumerian / Iranic. I mean, watch the video and see if you feel that way at the end. This is for you specifically, Volta. So stick around without spamming and without trying to annoy the mods. I want you to stick around. I don't want you to annoy the mods deliberately to get yourself blocked. Don't do that. Stick around. Don't be annoying. Listen. And then if you feel you have some cogent arguments to raise at the end, I know you want to block Wildflower, hold back for now. If you want to raise some cogent, rebuttals to the information that's raised, you are more than welcome to, because I love nothing more than to answer good questions. So if you feel like you have some really good, strong questions and strong data you want to present me, this is your time. Yeah, I will give you the floor to ask me those hard questions and see if myself and our audience have the capability to answer your arguments regarding ancient Egypt being a Sumerian / Iranic civilization. You are welcome to stay. Okay, let's get cracking. I know that, Wildflower, but we have to leave the door open. We're mature here. Let's go.
King Tutankhamun is easily one of the most recognizable names of the ancient world. But in spite of being one of the most portrayed individuals in ancient history, the true appearance of this new kingdom ruler has remained a mystery to the general public. His intact tomb was discovered by archaeologist Howard Carter in 1922. This novel find uncovered a treasure trove of pristine relics and artwork. Included in this archaeological jackpot were close to 400 portrayals of the young king. However, in spite of uncovering the most comprehensive collection of life-size...
So we're already seeing the multiple portrayals of King Tutankhamun through his life. And we're going to get a lot of this in the video, so I don't need to stop it too much. But I did want to bring us back actually to the very start. If you see towards the start of the video,
King Tutankhamun is easily one of the most recognizable names of the ancient world. But in spite of being one of the most portrayed individuals in ancient history, the true appearance of this new kingdom ruler has remained a mystery to the general public. His intact tomb was discovered by archaeologist Howard Carter in 1922. This novel find uncovered a treasure trove.
I want to pause it here, and I want to point to, or at least give a little bit of focus to, this man who's with Howard Carter. You can see he's a very strongly melanated man. And I have a video called 1925, which talks about during the time of Howard Carter and during the time of kind of like those early Egyptologists, the people that they would go to or bring along to excavations, they would go to for help, would really kind of fall into not many groups, okay? They would fall into either Nubians, who we've already discussed, the Saidi people, and the Bisharin, who are like the Beja, okay? Those are kind of like your three groups. These three groups historically are all black. They're all melanated black African groups. Yes, there has been some mixing amongst all three of these ethnicities, and I think they'll all admit they've had a little bit of the Alexandrite / Arab influx as a result of, what is the Islamicization of the nation. Yes, we know that that's the case. But by and large, these three groups are historically black and historically pleasant. And here's another thing. So here's another bit of data that you might find quite interesting. All three of these groups that I've mentioned have traceable historic lineage in ancient Egypt. It's my belief that the Saidi, and this is one that needs substantiation, but I think this will get proven over time. I believe the Saidi's origins are, there was an actual nome or sepat called Said, or it was called Sayai. Okay, they were called the Sayite or the Sayaiti people. I believe that's exactly the same people, the Saidi. Okay, some people called it Sayite, some people called it Sayis. Okay, but if you look at they'll call it, I think it was the 26th dynasty of ancient Egypt was a Sayite dynasty or Saidi dynasty. Now they used to be situated in the Delta region, but I believe, like most ancient Egyptian populations, they were forced south, and so now you'll find they settle more in the Luxor region. But these are melanated Africans. Okay, next one, Nubians, as we know, people who are currently settled in Aswan. Aswan's ancient Egyptian name, the name of the city of Aswan, was called Sewenat. Now people call it Sewenat now. Sewenat and Aswan are exactly the same word if you know your ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, because Sewenat would be SWNT. Now, without going into too much detail, the T tends to be an objectifier in a lot of place names. In other words, it changes the name into an object, and often it was silent. So what are you left with? SWN. What does SWN spell? Aswan. So the name Aswan is an ancient name. It hasn't changed. Same people, same name. And I could say exactly the same for the Bisharin, who we know as the Beja, who we know that name Beja relates to the name Mejai, because the Beja and the Mejai was interchangeable. So we know that the name Beja and Mejai go back to back. So we have three melanated African populations currently residing in Egypt who were associated with the ancient Egyptian population, who were relied upon in the time of Howard Carter to get any information that you need to get about the ancient Egyptians. No one went to Alexandrites to ask them about the ancient Egyptians, because the Alexandrites were foreigners. No one went to a load of these popular places like Cairo. No one went to these people. They went to the natives, the people who they knew were natives, and by and large, the natives were all melanated Africans. So I just thought I'd kind of just like pop that in there since we had this video on the screen. Sayite, Saidi, Mejai, Beja, Sewenet, Aswan, all ancient Egyptian lineages. Okay, so there you go. That one's for free. Let's carry on.
Trove of pristine relics and artwork. Included in this archaeological jackpot were close to 400 portrayals of the young king. However, in spite of uncovering the most comprehensive collection of life-size statues, statuettes, mannequins, sculptures, jars, chests and thrones, all depicting the young king, these portraits are cumulatively ignored by the experts, who instead opt to bypass the artistic and scientific data in favor of appeasing the sensibilities of Eurocentrism and modern Arabism.
I mean, we can all just pause it there and have a little bit of a laugh. Okay, this is easily the most publicized reconstruction of Tutankhamun, and we don't need to go into it in much detail. Okay, but we can just have a very quick cursory glance at this and quick breakdown of all of the things wrong with this reconstruction. So in fact, let me put that question out to the audience quickly. Who wants to present something that is anthropomorphically or craniometrically incorrect about the way this is being rendered? If anyone wants to, everyone wants to, I mean, we know it's ridiculous, but are there things that are phenotypically incorrect about it that we could mention? Because I could mention quite a few things off the cuff, as you know, but I want to leave the door open, see if anyone else wants to jump in as to what's wrong with this reconstruction. Okay, so let's go. First of all, we'll jump in with Surfactant's answer here, and he says they've adjusted the head. Okay, so let's talk about that head adjustment very, very briefly as we go. So the head of this reconstruction we know that the skull inside it has been rotated in order to give length to the nose. If you're familiar with the face of Tutankhamun, he doesn't have a long nose. He doesn't have a nose like this on any of his portraits. Okay, the way they gave it this long nose and has this point, which by the way breaks all of the rules, because even the nose that remains doesn't have projections to suggest that it's this long ski slope nose, but I'm not going to go into that right now. With that even being the case, they've created this really fake long nose. Okay, and they did this by rotating the skull downwards, and that's how they managed to get rid of Tutankhamun's obvious prognathism. One of his most strongest physical attributes, if you look at Tutankhamun's skull, but not just his skull, his artwork, is he's very prognathic. Even in the head of Nefertiti, he has a very prognathic. So by prognathic, I mean protruding jaw. He has a protruding jaw. He's quite strongly prognathic young man. You can see it if you look at a side view of the golden mask. Yet this reconstruction, miraculously, is retrognathic. In other words, his jaw, his mandible, literally recedes behind his cheeks. So how have they managed to gain the reverse? Well, they've done it by just tilting the skull until they got what they were after. You'll also note that the skull itself is, and this is the interesting thing, the skull is very visibly dolichocephalic. You can see it from front view, but they haven't, in order to give it this kind of Eurasian look, they've moved things around. So like I've already talked about, they've kind of rotated it so it peaks up at the back much more than it's supposed to. And they've also moved the ear back as far as they can. Can you see how far back his ear lies in his face? They've done that because they didn't want him to have that rear back of head protrusion, which they know is associated with Africans. The skin complexion looks nothing like any of King Tutankhamun's artwork and nothing like his mummy, which is dark-skinned. Okay, I know people will say, oh, well, it's mummified. It's like, well, look, if you're going to claim the hair doesn't change texture, then here's my argument. It's a very simple one. If you're going to claim that ancient Egyptian hair doesn't change texture as a result of being resined and wrapped, and all of these wavy-haired Egyptians, that was exactly how their hair looked in life, then I'm going to say, if their hair doesn't change, then their skin doesn't change. Yeah, let's meet in the middle. I'm happy to shake on that because I can find a bucket load of black people with wavy hair, but you're gonna find it really hard to find white people with black skin. So let's shake on that. Yeah, let's shake on that. Let's shake on the fact that the ancient Egyptian hair was exactly as it was found in life, as long as you also accept that the skin of the mummies was exactly the same. Yes, we shake on that, because if we're shaking on that, then we can all agree that this doesn't match anything that we see in Tutankhamun. Anyway, I'm not going to say any more spoilers because I cover most of the rest of this in this video, but that's jumping in right there. Let's pop on a couple of very interesting points as well that I've mentioned in previous live streams, and that is that mummies in all other regions tend to retain their complexion. Yeah, it's almost universal that mummies retain their complexion. It's kind of a premise of mummification. The whole idea that, oh, wow, you've been able to survive, your, soft tissue has managed to survive for thousands of years. So it must be in the conditions or in the environment where it's not suffering from decomposition. And so therefore we expect things like color to be somewhat retained. Except the case of the ancient Egyptians. They're the only population that in their entirety turned black, but all these other mummy populations that we found have managed to retain sometimes medium brown, sometimes even pale skin, if you're talking about the Chinese mummies. No one's talking about the fact that they've lightened over time. No, they look exactly as they died in their case. Interesting that, isn't it? Let's carry on.
That continue to dictate the tropes of Egyptology. Notable pieces include the head of Nefertiti portraying the king in his youth, his famous wooden mannequin, a life-size depiction of the young king in vivid and realistic color. We also have the golden throne, one of the few relics to have preserved full color and detail without degradation. Not to mention multiple statues and Schwabtees, all bearing the same striking features, albeit at different stages.
Here's what's interesting. I know we're going through the artworks here, but it's really important to point these out. Okay, so the one thing, like I said, you'll find that people who are, you know, who take this from an African perspective, take these arguments from an African perspective.
Not to mention multiple statues and Schwab
in common is that we try to utilize as much of the artwork as possible. You know, we don't cherry pick. We'll say, okay, if I need to know if I want to know what Tutankhamun looked like, I need all of his statues. Here's the sad thing. So many of his artworks have been tampered, even this one. See, this one still looks like a black man to me. But were you aware that this one has had the varnish rubbed off its skin? Okay, the dark brown varnish has been rubbed off this one. So even the brown that he is now, which is more of a natural wood color, which still presents as a black man, has already been tampered with the black parts restored, as you know they like to do. We've already discussed that. So this one's been tampered.
Tees, all bearing the same striking features,
And I'll show you more.
Albeit at different stages in.
These two have been tampered as well, unfortunately. Okay, so even these ones, which still have very dark skin, still feature-wise present as black people within those regions, have still been tampered. In fact, the only Schwabtees that he has, or Ushabtis that he has, that haven't been tampered are the next two that show.
In the young king's life, there is an important detail on all of the life-size depictions of the king that complement.
Look at the profile. So this is what I was saying earlier. So this is King Tutankhamun looking straight ahead. Look how prognathic he is. Like I said, he's not mildly prognathic. He has quite strong prognathism. Look where his cheek is and look how much forward his jaw is than his cheek. Okay, this is a strongly prognathic individual. Okay, very typically African profile view, but they've done their best to hide that as much as possible.
Implements the consistent use of dark tones.
And these are the only two Ushabtis that I found of Tutankhamun. This is what they look like when they found them. Look at the richness. And by the way, they keep these hidden as much as possible. This one, you barely even see. What you'll see if you search for it online, you'll see a duplicate that they have of it, I believe, in the New York Metropolitan Museum. They have a duplicate where they've just basically made this again, but made him much lighter and changed his features. But these are the originals. Look how deep and dark the tone that they went for is. And you know it's the original tone because you can see the eyes and the other parts that are painted are still in good preservation. Look at the body in contrast to the gold usek around his neck. Look at the difference. Okay, this is a deep, rich, dark brown color. A deep, rich, dark brown color. Deep, rich, dark brown color. That's the color that he had. Okay. I think people really have a hard time understanding that black people are brown, but that's a whole nother discussion.
That lie between a dark reddish chocolate brown and a deep black to depict him. The careful detailing of.
By the way, and I also want to point out that the quote-unquote funerary guards, you know, he has this statue wearing the cat, and we already spoke about the fact that the cat is a hair bonnet which houses afro hair. Okay, it's literally a big puffy circle, you know, fabric crown they used to wear on their head. An impossibility for people whose hair is not afro textured. That's just end of discussion. Okay, the cat was an impossibility. Let me say that again for those of you who are on the live stream. If you didn't have afro textured hair, then this crown wouldn't work for you. Okay, it will just be flat. Yeah, just to be clear about that. Yeah, so this crown would be flat. The only reason this crown, which was a favorite of the Amana lineage, Okay, the only reason this crown worked, Hatshepsut wore all the time, Akhenaten wore it, Tut wore it. The only reason this crown worked is because people had Afro hair to place inside it. It was indeed a bonnet. But anyway, I wasn't just talking about the bonnet on his head. I was talking about the fact that these so-called funerary guards are only called funerary guards by the Egyptologists. They're only called funerary guards by Carter and co. They just decided they were funerary guards. In fact, I'm of the strong impression that he placed them at the entrance. He was like, oh, we found them at the entrance guarding. They were not placed at the entrance like guards to the door. That's a load of nonsense that he made up. This is a striding pose statue. There are multiple of these. Many pharaohs have this exact pose. If you don't believe me now, just Google Amenemhat the First. Just Google statue of Amenemhat, striding statue or wooden statue of Amenemhat the First, and you'll see him in this exact pose. This was a favorite pose of many pharaohs to have this. What bothers them, or at least the reason they raise the entire funerary guard, is because they want to give you the impression that these statues were made after Tutankhamun had already died. And that's why they were black, because they've got this obsession of telling you that black is the color of death. And I've actually heard, you know, people who are, you know, Afrikaner, you know, academicians in this field repeat that. That's a lie. Okay, black is not the color of death in ancient Egypt. If anything, white is the color of death. Black is the color of completeness. Black is the color of Osiris. Black is like, it's like a depiction of omnipotency, so to speak. That's what black depicted. That's why you had I've got the whole video. If you want, in fact, watch the video that I've done called There Was No Color Blue or something along those lines, I think it's called. But watch that video and it explains the relationship that the ancient Egyptians had with the color black. Okay, it's far deeper. It's got nothing to do with being dead. Oh, when people died, they'll just paint it black. It's a load of rubbish. It certainly was a divine color, but it wasn't one. It's because then you could say that, oh, you know, the same thing about gold, for instance. All right, it had several layers to it. And I don't believe either of the two statues that we call funerary guards are funerary guards. I just think Egyptologists are uncomfortable with the fact that they have jet black skin in both of those depictions. I don't think they have provided any proof to say that they're funerary guards.
Reddening of the sclera in the eyes is a common trend used in his art, which intensified in his older portraits.
Now, the reddening of the sclera, which I've pointed out in this video, is actually one of my favorite little investigative pieces, particularly in the portraits of Queen Tutankhamun, but in also many other Egyptian monarchs. I love this detail that they've placed in their artwork because once again it raises the question of why this was the case. Now I've heard competing things. People have argued that, you know, could there have been the use of some kind of narcotics involved, all right, or some and I'm not going to discount that, by the way. I'm not laughing at that to say I don't believe that's the case. I think it's a possibility. But I think the strongest possibility is, once again, what I lean on in this video is for the Occam's razor approach. Would we be raising that as an argument if this wasn't a observation that favored the black origin of ancient Egypt? Would we be arguing that? No, we wouldn't. We wouldn't be arguing it. It's only because, oh, now we're going to take into account all the range of different possibilities as to why they depicted many monarchs with red eyes. I would argue, well, if you go to Africa, particularly people who live in areas with really strong sunlight, one of the things that the body does is it produces melanin on the sclera, on the whites of the eyes. It produces melanin, which causes almost a permanent overtinge of redness in the eyes. This is a trait of Africans, deeply melanated Africans. One of the multiple uses of melanin. In fact, wherever the sun becomes a You know, wherever the sun becomes something you need to manage effectively, you'll find melanin produces itself, even in nature. Here's an interesting side note for you guys, if you're maybe not aware. So there, I stumbled upon some research the other day, and it found that the fungus in Chernobyl. So those of you, many of you will know what Chernobyl is. Chernobyl is that place in, I think, Russia that had that massive radiation spill. But they found that the fungus in Chernobyl has evolved to basically produce melanin. So the fungus in Chernobyl has learned to produce melanin, and the melanin allows the fungus to consume the radiation. In other words, to use the radiation in the atmosphere the same way that they would use sunlight to produce and to grow and to their benefit. So they found that the fungus, just by having melanin, is able to manipulate radiation. This is a scientific fact. You can look this up yourself. Okay. I'm glad you knew that I was going to mention that, Darth. People don't really understand how significant melanin is in the human body. In fact, it's greatly lied about in the media. Let me show you. In fact, I want to show you something else, but it's not really mine to share. I've got a video that's dropping very soon. I do an interview with Dr. Marie Charles, and she shares this chart, which you're going to have to look at that video to see. But she shares this chart, which basically shows you that SPF formulation that Europeans put on their skin. So, you know, the SPF to protect them from UV radiation. If you look at it through a UV light, it has very similar properties, not the same, but very similar properties to melanin. So if you look at basically a European or white person through a UV light who's wearing SPF, they just look like they're covered in tar. They look black. That's how UV sees SPF. So why do I say that? I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but just stay with me. The reason I say that is because you've got black people out there putting SPF on their skin, but it does nothing to how the UV radiation already is dealing with you. You've already got the natural protection. Yeah, the melanation of your skin already does everything you need it to. You don't need to put that plastic poison on your skin. That is a fact. And if you don't think that's a fact, you need to watch my SPF deception video. Go back a few months. You need to watch that. Melanin is significant. Okay, I know I've gone a little bit off on a tangent there, but melanin is very significant. And another place we produce melanin is in the eyes. Okay, we produce it not just, by the way, the fidelity of dark eyes, i.e. black and brown eyes. And one of the things that I didn't even mention in this video is that they always paint themselves with jet black irises. The fidelity of jet black irises, the ability of black or dark colored irises to basically, the difference between jet black irises and blue irises is like the difference between kind of like HD and HDR. You know, when you got that high density, that ability to see in very fine detail, that's what you get in jet black eyes. Blue eyes don't have high fidelity, they're much lower fidelity. So in other words, when it's really bright, it blows out detail very, very soon. So you'll find that people with blue eyes have to squint a lot sooner than people with black eyes. Now, to be fair, the same works the other way. So blue eyes have greater darkness fidelity. So blue eyes are able to allow a bit more light in, which makes them be able to see in the dark a little bit better. But when it comes to the light, there's no competition. So I'm just raising all this to say, I don't think it was an accident when the ancient Egyptians decided to capture this detail of the reddening of the eyes. I'm going to go for Occam's razor and say, if you go down the Nile today and you look at all of the ethnicities along the Nile today, this is a really common trait. So why would I assume that it's got something to do with smoking marijuana when a lot of people just, if you walk down the Nile or if you walk, in Central Africa, the people have this trait. In tropical Africa, it's, every other person has got really red sclera, So it's, to me, it's just Occam's razor once again. Which one are we gonna do? Okay, which one are we gonna do? So that's that. So anyway, let me let this carry on now.
This is significant because it is a unique condition linked to a buildup of melanin in continental African populations. NewHealthAdvisor.org states,
most Africans have high levels of melanin that results in yellow eyes. Melanin determines the color of your skin, sclera, and eyes. When this concentration increases, the eye color becomes light yellow or muddy brown.
The Kemetic artist carefully captured this uniquely African trait in many portraits of the...
This is not a rarely seen bust of, I believe, Tutankhamun, but I think some argue that it's Akhenaten. But I think my estimations based on the facial features have leaned towards it being Tutankhamun, particularly the mouth and the nose. And I think this is him much later life. Well, it's a gilded sarcophagi, so I guess we can assume obviously it's at that stage. But let's look at the broadness of his nose in this as well. Look how African his features are, eyes aside.
The young king, placing him exclusively amongst the heavily melanated African populations. But that isn't all. In support of his portraits, the young king's body possesses a uniquely regional physiognomy that paint an unambiguous mosaic of his ethno-cultural origins. Do we have enough information to infer which ethnic group or groups he may lay closest to? Let's explore this. First, his skull exhibits strong dolichocephaly. Dolichocephaly.
Now, the argument about King Tutankhamun's dolichocephaly has gone back and forth. Let me tell you where I'm at with this. If you look, for instance, at the various reconstructions of Tutankhamun, they all present definitely a dolichocephalic skull. And these are even reconstructions. If you look at all of the 3 reconstructions that were sanctioned by Zahi Hawass, and you measure the width of them against the length, you will find that they are all unanimously dolichocephalic. They look dolichocephalic and they present as dolichocephalic. And you'll even find Hawass in his early writings in 2008 declaring that King Tutankhamun's skull is dolichocephalic. However, in the book that I have, Scanning the Pharaohs, Hawass does mention that he's gone from being dolichocephalic to brachycephalic. And from my understanding, Hawass changes from measuring King Tutankhamun's skull using CT scans in 2008, which to me is the best way you can measure cephalic index, because you literally get, cross sections of the skull, which will give you the the most ideal measurements. He went from that to a manual method, okay, where you kind of use calipers and stuff like that. And I think that method's called the Weber method, and getting different readings. And the only difference that I can see is that he probably changed the way in which he was measuring the skull. I think he changed the way in which he was measuring the skull to get the different outcome. I think he's using it, and I've talked already about the way he tilts the skull and stuff like that. I'm not going to go into all of that because I've done live streams about King Tutankhamun's skull ad nauseum. But I do want to be transparent and say that there is some discussion about whether or not he's dolichocephalic or he's brachycephalic. There is discussion, but there has been a single person, being Zahi Hawass, who has access to his skull, who has gone from claiming he's dolichocephalic to being brachycephalic, who's presented dolichocephalic reconstructions to, well, he hasn't presented anything to refute that so far. So it's kind of like, where do you go? We know he's a megalomaniac, and we know that he doesn't present people with the actual skull to run their own measurements. to me, with Tutankhamun's skull shape being absolutely dolichocephalic or somewhere in the middle or even brachycephalic, I don't think it matters, because ultimately his skull is African. And the shape has got more than just the cephalic index. It's to do with, if you look at the still of the screenshot, look at the rear protrusion. That is more telling of its Africanity than whether or not, I'm not dolichocephalic, by the way, to be clear, and I've mentioned that many, many times. I'm mesocephalic. My skull is not that long, but I do have that rear protrusion, that little thing that makes my skull look more African than other people's skulls. And King Tutankhamun had that in spades. He had the most overtly and stereotypical beanhead that you could ever want to see on a human being. There's no, to me personally, there's no other ethnic kind of like group outside of Africa that produce skulls of this shape. And I'm not just talking about dolichocephalic, because Europeans, when they are dolichocephalic, exhibit it completely different than Africans. They don't exhibit it like this. This is an African expression of phenotype. Someone said peanut head. It's like, yeah, peanut head, hook head, whatever you want to call it, we know what it is, because to us it is culturally a norm to see heads like this. So for us, it's laughable when people present King Tutankhamun's head shape and they're like, what race was he? It's like, Africans will just look at that head and laugh, because everyone's got a cousin whose head looks like that. This is the difference, and this is when you're kind of like arguing on these levels. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of raise that point about King Tutankhamun's dolichocephaly. There's mixed reports about it, which is bizarre, but there you go.
Is a measurement of the cephalic index gained by comparing the width of one's skull in relation to the length when measured from a bird's eye view. When a skull has a long length and relatively narrow width, it is classed as dolichocephalic, the technical name used to describe that infamously long head shape that King Tutankhamun has become renowned for. The alternative head shape is brachycephalic, or round-skulled, which denotes a skull where length and width are much more closely aligned. The dolichocephalic head shape.
And let me actually be very clear, because I did put in this video Eurasian trait, and I know when I wrote that what I was trying to communicate. Brachycephaly is found in Africa. There are very brachycephalic populations in Africa, the Igbo being one of them, for instance. You get very Africoid, the Ijaw being another. Okay, but then you get really strongly dolichocephalic populations like the Yoruba, for instance. They are, by and large, predominantly dolichocephalic. The Maasai are predominantly dolichocephalic. So you get this mix. I mentioned Eurasian trait, not because that makes it, oh, you've got a Caucasian head shape, you've got brachycephaly. No, that's not the point I was making. The point I was making is that, by and large, Eurasians tend to fall on that side of the spectrum, somewhere between brachycephaly and mesocephalic. That's the Eurasian norm. They sit in that. Africans have the full spectrum, but Eurasians sit in a very restricted norm when it comes to their head shapes. And this is known. This is very well known. They even speak about the brachycephalization. It's really funny. They speak about the brachycephalization of modern Europe or later Europeans, as though all of a sudden Europeans' head shapes suddenly changed. And when they came up with this theory, they totally ignored the fact that we have multiple population replacement events explaining why this group's head shapes were completely different to this group's head shape. But the problem is they want to claim this group's head shape, about this group's history. So all those dolichocephalic Europeans who have all of that juicy history they want to claim, they don't want to admit that we modern brachycephalic Europeans have got nothing to do with this group that we replaced and we killed. So rather than admitting the fact that we replaced and we killed them, as is proven by genetics, founder effects, and all these other things, bottlenecks, it's been proven you came after, you replaced, and you wiped them out. Rather than admitting that, they say, oh no, what happened? We are the same people. What happened? We had a sudden shift towards brachycephalic skulls at this date. That's Eurocentric historical. That's 101 Eurocentrism. That's exactly how they operate. They just make up things, and they've given it a name: brachycephalization of Europe. Google it if you want to have a look at it. Read up the brachycephalization of Europe, and then you can the way that they twist history. It's very, very interesting.
Is prolific amongst modern African populations, along with a scattering of ethnicities in the Middle East who are confirmed to have a high degree of African admixture. However, it is notably rare among the vast majority of Eurasian populations. In a study conducted by Raymond Dart on...
I'm just going to pause it here, really quickly, because this is just to kind of emphasize what I was talking about, the difference in the expression of the head shapes. This is a really normal kind of like African head shape here. Very normal. I wouldn't say it's exclusive, but I'd say it's very normal. That rear protrusion, that is really known African trait. Whereas what you see here, the more flat back of head and kind of like drop off, where the spine is much more closely aligned to this region is called the occipital region, where the spine is much more closer to the occipital region. That is by and large, a Eurasian trait. Okay, this head shape, okay, irrespective of what your cephalic index is, the head shape of Africans has got a signature. Yeah, it's got a signature. I have to stress that. Okay, the head shape of Africans versus the head shape of Europeans has a signature, and you can guess what every single skull exhumed in ancient Egypt, what traits they exhibit. You can guess. So even irrespective of cephalic index, just based on the way the skulls present themselves, you can guess where the ancient Egyptian skulls fall in line with.
2,861 skulls from the pre-dynastic to the Middle Kingdom of ancient Egypt, it was noted that only 1% of pre-dynastic Egyptian skulls were brachycephalic. This included just 1% of the 101 skulls from El Amra, less than 2% of the 314 skulls from Nagada, and none of the 79 skulls from El Badari. From the 1st to the 12th dynasties, brachycephaly barely exceeds 6%. And following a brief peak during the intermediary period, brachycephaly is under 2% during the Middle Kingdom. These results are significant because they suggest that a disproportionate majority of the nearly 3,000 skulls measured were dolichocephalic or long-headed, with a strikingly high rate among...
I have to give a massive shout out to Nydia Senegal, who did these wonderful reconstructions that you're seeing of these skulls. These are her forensic reconstructions. I don't really do many forensic reconstructions. Those of you who know me, I focus more on the artwork reconstructions. I will bring forensics in, but normally I'll bring the forensics in just to corroborate the artwork reconstruction I've already created. So just to make sure that we have basically alignment of the features and make sure that I've kind of like honored the projection of, you know, the zygomatic region, the prognathism. I've got that all correct. I like to make sure all of those things correspond with the skull. I am not producing a piece of, you know, a reconstruction that looks nothing like the mummy that was presented. Nydia, on the other hand, Nydia Senegal, if you are not subscribed to her channel here and on Instagram and on TikTok, she does actual forensic reconstructions just of the skull, and they're really fantastic. So please do give them a look-see if you get a chance, okay?
Amongst the indigenous population, and this trait is consistent amongst even the pharaonic lineage of the New Kingdom.
Oh, by the way, her reconstruction of Thuya is just amazing. Make sure you check it out. She's done a forensic reconstruction of Thuya, and it's just kind of like, yeah, your arguments out the window now. I don't need to hear your Eurocentric arguments anymore, because you know they get all gassed and all. Oh, she had wavy hair. Oh, wavy hair. And it's like, you guys really don't get it, do you? And by the way, just to actually point out, whilst we're on Thuya and any Egyptian female nobles, I always make sure that I point out the fact that, and this it doesn't even maybe perhaps stress this enough, if you were a female noble, your hair was braided. Yeah. Pull up the mummy of Amos Nefertari if you get a chance. Pull up the mummy of gosh, I'm having a complete brain block here. I don't know why I've just completely, I had all the names in my head and I've just completely lost them. But there's multiple. Amos Nefertari, there's the one who has the two big locks and I've completely forgotten her name. But if you look at the protocol, I know some of you will come up with the names of the mummies in the chat. Help me out there because I'm just had a complete brain block. But if you look at the mummies of the ancient Egyptian females and queens, when they're not tampered, they are in braids. No, T's, thanks Macy for mentioning T, but T's another one that was heavily tampered. T was in one of the worst states we've ever found in Egyptian mummy. And when the braids are taken out, what you're left with is this wavy braid out pattern. And I've explained this before. If you just look, if you know any African person, anyone with any texture of Afro hair from 4C to 4B or whatever, 3C, whatever the other textures are, it doesn't matter. When someone's got their hair in really long, tight braids and they take the braid out, they are left with a pattern that is identical to Queen T's hair or Queen Taye's hair, Lady Tuya's hair, all of these others. Yeah, you'll find that they have that exact pattern. And you can even see where the braids were, because it's kind of like you can see the strands that used to be braided together if you look close enough. So if you understand African hair, you'll realize even when they're pulling up these queens and these females with their hair and it's out and they're like, oh, it's wavy. It's like, no, it's a braid out. What you're looking at is a braid out. I'm not doubting that the hair was wavy. I'm not doubting the fact that Africans have wavy hair, but you have to understand, take into fullness of what you're looking at. There were protocols in terms of burial, how people would be buried. There were protocols. That's a fact. Okay. And those protocols dictated how Egyptian noblewomen would have their hair in separate braids. And then those two separate braids formed into two large jumbo braids, okay, which would be presented around the front of them. That's how an ancient Egyptian noblewoman would be buried. So when you see an ancient Egyptian noblewoman with their hair loosed out, someone has very painstakingly taken that woman's braids out. That's what's happened with Queen T, and that's what's happened with Yuya. That is a fact. Okay. Let me just give a quick shout to... Would you mind making a post with the creators mentioned earlier? Can someone do that, please? I can't remember exactly. Yeah. If people can do that as I go along, I'd really appreciate that. So I think I've mentioned Nydia, I've mentioned Kapruki. I can't remember who else I met. Smash Rockwell. Just pop their links in. I don't mind. I like them all. And Jonathan earlier said, we don't trust that man. I know you must be talking about Zahi Hawass, because like who else? Who else would you be talking about? You know? Let's carry on.
Being seen in Tuya, Ramses, and obviously King Tutankhamun, among others. Although this is somewhat overlooked in modern anthropology, a 2004 study by Isabelle Ribot titled Differentiation of Modern Sub-Saharan African Populations, Cranometric Interpretations in Relation to Geography and History, highlights the benefit of utilizing the cephalic index as a tool to identify populations because of its high heritability, stating,
Vault shape, or cephalic index, seems to have a higher heritability than the rest of the body or stature.
So in terms of anthropometrics...
And just to be clear, that argument blows out the window that whole idea of random brachycephalization of populations that the Eurocentrists... It's interesting, that brachycephalization study came out ages ago. I want to say in the mid 20th century, early to mid 20th century, they released, it was the mid 20th century, not early, they released that paper on brachycephalization because they realized that their history was intrinsically intrinsically lay in populations that were presented as dolichocephalic, their European history. And they thought they were all dolichocephalic when they were writing those early studies. They were like, oh yes, the superior European with a beautiful dolichocephalic head shape. And then they went around the world measuring European heads, and they all came back brachycephalic. They're like, no, definitely the Swedish. The Swedish have dolichocephalic, and they went to Sweden like, nah, yeah. They realized all modern Europeans. I remember modern Europeans, if we talk about modern later Europeans, we are talking about a very small, tiny subset of humanity that has expanded very rapidly. So they are very closely related. They don't have any of the diversity or the variance that you find in Africa. So it's not like you can get they're all pretty much, not too far from each other in terms of their physical anthropometrics. You can see it with the limb proportions as well. So they realized, hey, we're all brachycephalic. So they then switched the whole argument, and now all of a sudden the brachycephalic skulls became superior. And on top of that, there was we can explain this by making up this theory called brachycephalization, where everyone's skull changed in 100 years. I kid you not, this is their theory. In a small window of about 100 years, everyone in Europe simultaneously, north to south, east to west, all of their skulls in a couple of generations changed. Yeah, that's their theory. Okay, that is their theory. Yeah, but I'm not here to argue for or against. I'm just telling you this is what they put out there. Okay, so there you go. Irish much different than Russian? I don't know if they are. I mean, you're saying that French is very different. I'm talking to Locke here. I don't see. It depends what you define by different. Okay, it just depends what you define by different, because different in Africa means different. Different in Europe doesn't really mean different. If you're talking about phenotypically or genotypically different in Africa, you can get two people that are hundreds of thousands of years removed genetically, who look the same, or people who look completely different, who are literally cousins and have completely different complexions, completely different, physical expressions. One's retrographic, the other one's prognathic. I mean, you get all of that variance in Africa. You don't get that reference in I don't think you've been to Ireland. Look, your name is Locke, and there's no way you've been to Ireland to say the Irish look like elves, because they really that's weird. That's weird. I'm gonna move on.
Or phenotype. The cephalic index is one of the most consistently inherited physical traits in human populations, which raises the question, where in modern populations can we find comparable rates of dolichocephaly? The answer by now should be unsurprising. Modern populations whose skulls produce a cephalic reading of below 75, which is what Tutankhamun's mummy exhibits, are commonly seen throughout Africa, with a particular concentration along the Nile Valley. This is confirmed by Seligman, who states,
the Maasai, Nandi, and Turkana give a cephalic index of 73 to 74, which being under 75 is dolichocephalic, i.e. the head is prominently long from forehead to back of head and narrower from side to side.
So just to substantiate what we've just discussed regarding the cephalic indexes and dolichocephaly present, it's very, very, very strong along the Nile and the Great Lakes, particularly along the Great Lakes region of Africa. So if you look along the White Nile region, you have you have skull shapes basically that are exactly the same as the ancient Egyptians in every way, shape, or form. Every way, shape, or form. Every way, shape, or form. I know I've just said that 3 times in a row, but it's important that I say that. Along the Blue Nile, you do get some of the traits. You get a lot of the dental traits that you see in the ancient Egyptians. You don't so much get that extreme expression of dolichocephaly like you get it in the White Nile region, they have literally almost identical skull shapes. And you can find every skull shape very, very easily in any of the nations, like I've mentioned, ones that I mentioned there, be it, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, parts of Kenya. You will see the exact same skull shapes of the ancient Egyptians, exactly the same, with all of the traits. Okay. Now, is it a coincidence that when it comes into the genetic part of this study, you realize that that region has a very clear advantage over the rest of Africa in terms of its relationship, particularly to this lineage, this Armana lineage? Is there coincidence there, or is there continuity? I think there's enough way of an argument to suggest a continuity, but we can talk about that as we move into it. Locke, I think you're capping about your knowledge of the Irish, to be honest with you. I think you're capping. I don't know if you've met many Irish people. They don't fit into the brackets that you're creating, man. I'm sorry. I'm not with you on this.
This perspective is supported by anthropologist Caroline Wilkinson, who states regarding dolichocephaly:
the distance from the forehead to the back of the skull is long in relation to the overall height of the cranium. And that's something that you see quite frequently in certain populations, one of which is ancient Egyptians. Another would be Black African groups will also show that characteristic.
These studies
I love that quote. I'm going to play it back, and then I'm going to tell you afterwards why I love this quote from Caroline Wilkinson, because this one kills. This one kills the Eurocentrists and the Arab centrists. This one kills them. They really hate this. Let me play it back. Let me give it a little rewind. Okay, so in case you were paying attention, I want you to all pay attention to this quote by Caroline Wilkinson
regarding dolichocephaly:
the distance from the forehead to the back of the skull is long in relation to the overall height of the cranium. And that's something that you see quite frequently in certain populations, one of which is ancient Egyptians. Another would be Black African groups will also show that characteristic.
Don't you love that quote? I love it because it's ironic. She says, we see this trait, okay, where the length of the skull is quite long in comparison to the height of the vault. Okay, basically describing dolichocephaly, but you notice what this is reason number one why I like it. She's describing specifically the African kind of dolichocephaly, because the Eurasian type of dolichocephaly doesn't have that height correspondence. She's placed that in there, which makes it very interesting. She says, yes, they have a long skull, but they have a lower vault. That's a very African trait. Okay. The higher vault would be the Eurasian trait. So you can have a long skull with a high vault, a dolichocephalic skull with a high vault. It doesn't have the characteristics. She's broken down specifically a kind of skull trait that is specifically African, which is long skull, low vault. Okay. And she says, and her response is so interesting. She says, that's something we see amongst Black Africans and ancient Egyptians. I need you guys to understand. This is something that we see amongst Black Africans and ancient Egyptians. Do you see the unwillingness to place them together? Okay. Any other person in her field, in the field of anthropology, would just say Egypt is in Africa. This is something we see in Black Africans, and therefore the Black Africans and the ancient Egyptians are the same people. So she could have just said, this is something that we see in Black Africans, including the ancient Egyptians. But she doesn't say that. She says, this is something we see in Black Africans and in ancient Egyptians. In other words, she's saying ancient Egyptians and Black Africans have this exact same trait. They have really similar skulls, but we must keep them separate. Isn't that interesting? Can you imagine if this was the other way around? Can you imagine if ancient Egyptian skulls were consistent with Europeans? Do you know we wouldn't even be having this argument right now? They would have washed their hands, done and dusted, washed, dried, put their hands under the Dyson, left the bathroom in their BMW on the way home. That's what they would, if it was the other way around, that's where the Eurocentrists would be. Excuse me, what's wrong with you Afrocentrists? You guys are absolutely ridiculous. They've measured the skulls of the ancient Egyptians and they're 100% consistent with European skulls. They have our exact head shape. They didn't look like you. But that's not true. It's the other way around, isn't it? The truth is that they have the skulls of Black Africans. You've just heard her say it there. Ancient Egyptians have the skull shapes of Black Africans. But it's not good enough for us to tell you that they were Black Africans. But the good thing about this video is that we know it's not just the skulls that they shaped. They shared a lot more. A lot more.
These studies confirm dolichocephalic skulls at this rate is largely accepted to be an African phenomena. Although, thankfully, now researchers agree it is impossible to define Africans using a homogeneous lens like Chaboeuf in 1959, who falsely defined the entire continent as dolichocephalic. This is incorrect since there are brachycephalic populations amongst the dolichocephalic ones, and even more populations with a veritable mix of skull shapes. However, modern studies, as supported by Ribot, continue to attest dolichocephaly is only prominent at those rates amongst African groups, with a notably high frequency comparable to those seen in ancient Egypt amongst modern Nilotic African populations. In addition to this, craniometrically, Tutankhamun exhibits regional dental and facial morphology characterized by diastema, overjet, and overbite coupled with mild prognathism, which are all exceedingly common amongst Africans, particularly in the same populations who are present along the Blue Nile and the White Nile in modern times. For clarity, diastema describes a gapping of the front teeth. Overjet describes an acute angling of the maxilla, in contrast to the almost vertical angle seen in Eurasian populations. And finally, overbite describes the protrusion of upper jaw over the lower. Researcher James Harris states, generally, the dentition of each New Kingdom pharaoh and queen represents a unique combination of dental characters, such as overbite, overjet, interincisal relationship, and molar relationship, which permits the identification of each mummy from the X-rays of the dentition alone. Dental alveolar prognathism, an inherited trait which is normal for the Nubian people, ancient and modern, may be observed in pharaohs Thutmose I, Thutmose II, Siptah and Meremptah, and most of the queens of the 21st dynasty. It may be surprising to some that a combination of these traits is a common occurrence in East African Nilotic populations, but doesn't indicate dental malformation. Rather, it is an expression of phenotype present in African craniomorphology for thousands of years. Put simply, these are some of the facial traits that distinguish native African people from other groups. Most African populations tend towards excellent dental health owing to
talking about this, we kind of dive into the dental health part, or at least not even dental health, just the dental expressions. The attempt by Eurocentrists to present African, this is a really important point. There's a very concerted attempt in the field of Egyptology to present African traits as disabilities. Yeah, I'm sure you guys have noticed that. Every time they see an African trait, in order to explain it away, rather than just say, oh, he's got teeth like an African, he is probably an African, they'll turn around and find a way of saying, this is a Eurasian exhibiting some kind of malformality, okay? He has some signs of Habsburg jaw. He clearly has cranial deformation taking place, and the inbreeding of his ancestry. He has caused the malformation of his teeth. We'll also look for Marfan syndrome to explain these big lips, and he probably had reverse vitiligo to explain his black skin. It's like everything that we have naturally and we can explain. And that was really one of the biggest premises I had to make in this video. King Tutankhamun's presentation is so quintessentially and indisputably just a young African boy. It's so easy to prove it if we just sit down and just literally talk about every aspect that he's showing. That's what this video exists for. To say, look, slow your roll, Zawi. I know you don't like to be called Zawi. Slow your roll, Zawi. Slow your roll, you know, reconstruction artists, you know, Carolyn Wilkinson, Chris Colbert, whoever it is, you're getting Elizabeth Darners. Slow your roll. This isn't some diseased, malformed white Arab child. This is a perfectly normal, physically complete African boy. That's what this is. And we can explain every single trait, from his slightly bucky teeth, yeah, his slightly overjetting buck teeth, yeah, no offense, but yeah, certain parts, certain East Africans, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. To his longish bean head, yeah, we can explain all that. You don't need, you're doing too much. Yeah, you're trying to find this syndrome, that syndrome, all of this crap. You're doing too much, because you know an African can just come along and go like, that's an African boy. What are you talking about? This is the dehydrated body of an African boy. Like, we're not crazy here. And that's really the common sense approach that this video was trying to do. I hope it's something that people kind of understood when they watched it. Let's carry on.
To thicker than normal tooth enamel, and historic adherence to meticulous dental care routines. These routines date back several millennia, spanning the entire African continent. In the research paper titled Anterior Tooth Relations in Kenyan Africans, Professor Jamila Hassan Ali, when observing dental traits amongst the Kenyan populations, noted
The highest prevalence of diastema was amongst the Maasai at 61.3%. Of overbite at 84% and overjet at 99%, it was found amongst the Kikuyu.
This study echoes the typically high occurrences that such traits have amongst Nilotic Africans. Indeed, King Tutankhamun exhibiting these traits in his teeth is far more likely to be an expression of his regional Africanity than the results of any alleged health conditions. The young king's teeth, like the rest of his skull, exhibit traits that are perfectly in situ amongst the modern populations of the Nile, who continue to express them in an identical manner to this very day. Africans tend to have thicker and fuller lips and features that perfectly and naturally house the maxillary tilt and overbite. The same would have been the case for the young king. His portraits perfectly portray the reality of these traits.
This side view is mine, I'm glad to say, on this occasion. And I would say one of my kind of like favorite renditions, this side view of Tutankhamun. It really looks, and once again, like I said to you earlier, I started with this is almost an exact rendition of his golden mask from side view, profile view. And you guys can just see there exactly what happened when I overlaid it with his skull. So for people who are acting like the artwork isn't compatible, it's absolutely
tend to have thicker and fuller lips and features that perfectly and naturally house the maxillary tilt and overbite.
So there's the skull, and then watch how perfectly it overlays. Just watch how perfectly.
The same would have been the case for the young king. His portraits perfectly portray the reality of these traits.
I should have shown it actually showing through, but it perfectly overlays, and you just see, look, that natural African bean head. This is literally shown on his golden mask. You can see where his golden mask, when it comes out the back, the Nemes, you can see how far it comes out the back to house the fact that he's got this long head. You know, such a typical African boy. In fact, there's even this Nguni boy who's singing, this South African boy who I've caught a little snippet of him singing, who's got Tutankhamun's exact side profile, teeth and everything, but I only got like a little snippet of him. I hope I can.
Africanity than the results of any
This
alleged
boy, I don't know if you know, I think he's quite famous, but I was like, oh my gosh,
conditions.
like from the side. He looks like him from the front, but he has like almost the exact same phenotype that you see on King Tutankhamun's golden mask. He's a young South African boy. I think he's quite famous, but you'll see, you'll probably find
the young king's teeth, like the rest of his skull, exhibit traits that are perfectly in situ amongst the modern populations of the Nile, who continue to express them in an identical manner to this very day. Africans tend to have thicker and fuller lips and features that perfectly and naturally house the maxillary tilt and overbite. The same would have been the case for the young king. His portraits perfectly portray the reality of these traits when exhibited in native African populations. His overbite and overjet naturally fell behind his full lips, rather than protruding between them as seen in many recent reconstruction attempts that misunderstand African physiognomy.
And this is not to toot my own horn here. This isn't. But let's just play this again as we listen to what's being said and as we see the reconstructions, and tell me if it feels, who it feels like is being disingenuous in their presentation of what Tutankhamun looks like.
Traits when exhibited in native African populations. His overbite and overjet naturally fell behind his full lips, rather than protruding between them as seen in many recent reconstruction attempts that misunderstand African physiognomy.
So you saw that there was just like no attempt, zero attempt. Someone said the super chat was blocking, so let me just bring it back slightly so you can see it again.
His overbite and overjet naturally fell behind his full lips, rather than protruding between them as seen in many recent reconstruction attempts that misunderstand African physiognomy.
So you guys hopefully saw third time's a charm. Yeah. Zero attempt made by the Euro/Arab centrists to actually produce the face of Tutankhamun. And I think that is just the ultimate disrespect. It's the ultimate disrespect that they would never. Can you imagine them doing a reconstruction of, let's talk about one of their beloved falsely claimed characters. So let's say like the bust of Julius Caesar that everyone's familiar with and they've made a million reconstructions of. Yeah. Imagine if they took that bust, yeah, and the Chinese went away and then they brought back someone who looked like Kim Jong-un and said, this is the real face of Caesar. Yeah, this is the real face of Caesar. This is based on our, analysis, our Cranometric analysis of people within the Roman region. Like, they just wouldn't have it. No one would have it. It would be like, this is ridiculous. But you're allowed to come to Africa, take the face of what is quite indisputably an African boy on every artifact, be it his mannequin, his golden mask, his shabtis, his funerary guard statues. Doesn't matter which one it is. And just race swap him viciously to something that looks nothing like him. But then to present and to pretend to the rest of the world that what you've done is the truest forensic representation of his remains, when this video proves that that's an absolute lie. This video proves that there was no attempt to even take into regard any of his forensic aspects. Zero. And that's what's frustrating more than anything. CD, quick shout out to you. He says, agree 100%, but Old Kingdom, Don, I think you must have meant to say Dons there are more Nilo-Saharan. Nilo-Saharan, Old Kingdom. I want to know what you mean when you say Nilo-Saharan. You mean like you mean Nilo-Saharan is encompassing the Sahel, the Maghreb, the Nile, because Nilo-Saharan is quite a broad, sweeping brush. Yeah, but in that sense, I would slightly argue. I mean, I slightly agree, because Old Kingdom is very broad phenotypically. You get a lot of phenotypes. I would say Old Kingdom gives me more tropical outcomes when it comes to reconstruction work. Middle Kingdom definitely gives me that kind of broader Sahel region. And then I would say New Kingdom is when we get really strict quite strict East African phenotypes. So I'd say it gets less broad by the time you get to the New Kingdom, and you're more concentrated along the Nile. All of the mentioned groups that we've mentioned here, along the Blue, the White Nile, and right up until Sudan, Northern Sudan, you get all of those phenotypes across the New Kingdom. So you do really get a spread. And this is my feedback based on the reconstruction work I've done. But it's interesting because at that period in time, there was still genetically seems like they genetically meshed more with Central and Southern Africans than anyone else. So that's interesting. So yeah, it's just interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, I hear that, and I appreciate the donation as well. Are you guys talking about the guy from Onset Music? It might be because he's quite. But you saw his profile there, so that might be him. It might be Onset Music. I'm not going to search it now, but yeah, it's young South African boy. If that's what you're talking about here, I'm not sure if that is what you're talking about. But yeah, he has this very Tutankhamun look on his features. Really, really kind of like, yeah, giving me Tutankhamun a lot.
Now that we've discussed his skull, are there any more clues we can gather from the body of the king? This brings us into a field of study called anthropometrics. Strictly speaking, anthropometry is the scientific study concerned with measurements and proportions of the human body. In terms of our investigation into the phenotypic traits that exist between ethnicities, it remains really the only field able to yield definitive results that will help us to determine the ethnicity of the boy king. In the case of King Tutankhamun, anthropometrically speaking,
now I'm just going to quickly go back to this point
into the phenotypic trait
here, where there's kind of like there's some graphics in the back as I'm speaking. These graphics are from a short that I actually produced. So yeah, hit the like button if you haven't done that yet, guys. We've got 220 in the house. But there's a short I did on the anthropometrics that is the limb proportions of the ancient Egypt. Well, yeah, of Black people in general and Africans in general. And actually, limb proportions is one of those things that I wouldn't say is, but almost expresses itself like a constant. It's the modern Eurasians versus modern Africans are very divergent when it comes to limb proportions. And the thing about it is, one of the things they've done is they've made it very taboo to talk about, physical differences between aspects of humanity. Now, it wasn't before, but it became more and more taboo and more of a thing that they wanted to control through political correctness when they realized it was something that didn't fall in their favor. This is something that you'll find. So they were perfectly happy to talk about, physical divergences between populations when it worked in their favor. But then as time went on and they realized, oh, actually, Africans are kind of like a super group who kind of like encompass everything. So it's impossible to exclude Africans. Then they started withdrawing and then hiding behind these kind of like these ceilings of political correctness. And they use it as a guard. They use terms like phrenology to say, oh yeah, Well, next thing you know, you'll be measuring noses like the Nazis. It's like, no, relax. We can maturely express the known fact that Africans, for instance, have longer limbs than their European counterparts. Excuse me. Yeah, we can surely and maturely express the fact that Africans have longer limbs than their European counterparts. That's something that we see throughout. I'm a big, as you guys know, if you've been in the channel for a little while, MMA/boxing fan. I love my combat sports. Okay. If a white guy and a black guy fight and they're the same height, the black guy will have a longer reach. That's just a fact. Okay. That's not an opinion. It's just a fact. Okay. The black guy will have longer legs. The black guy will probably have skinnier legs. Okay. These are anthropometric differences. The way it can be explained essentially is that black people have got what's classified as tropically adapted limb proportions, and Eurasians, remember, coming from a very small subset of humanity, which is why they're restricted. Their subset of humanity that went on to form what are later or modern Europeans was a very kind of opposite. Well, it was a very relatively short-limbed, long-torsoed portion of humanity. Some say that those traits could have been emphasized or even inherited from the Neanderthal admixture. I'm not sure which one came first or how it got there, but the bottom line is Eurasians by and large have got longer torsos and shorter distal segments. That is the last parts of your limbs, i.e. the femur bone, which is they'll have a shorter femur and they'll have shorter kind of arms beyond the elbow, whereas Africans will have those parts will be longer, and Africans tend to have broader shoulders naturally as well, much longer femurs, which is why we have smaller calf muscles, because they're more stretched, and Eurasians have more dense calf muscles. So there's definite physical differences. Okay, definite physical differences between what are your modern Eurasians and your modern Africans. That's almost a constant. I'm not talking about Africa. This tends to be melanated people worldwide tend to exhibit a lot of these traits. I think the only place where melanated people don't have the limb proportions that match the tropical limb proportions are, I think, the Australasians. And I think that's because of there's quite heavy Denisovan influence there that has changed the proportions of the Australasians. So they're slightly different. But the rest of the global melanated populations have those same African limb proportions, which are called tropically adapted. But I would just argue that those are Homo sapien limb proportions, and the other ones show traits of introgressions from other populations which have changed their outlook. But this is why we have that very clear divergence between Black African populations and non-Black African populations. Now, this is another, alongside the, Caroline Wilkerson, they've got the same skulls thing. This is another field goal, end of discussion, point blank, done and dusted thing that we have with the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptian limb proportions fall in line with modern melanated populations wholly. Okay, they exhibit traits that would place them very cleanly, and you're going to see with King Tutankhamun, he is like a perfect exhibit of black limb proportions, because they have calculations to be able to assign these measurements. So anyway, that was me giving a long introduction to what this is going to explain anyway, but hopefully that little bit of extra detail you'll find useful. Let's carry on playing.
Traits that exist between ethnicities, it remains really the only field able to yield definitive results that will help us to determine the ethnicity of the boy king. In the case of King Tutankhamun, anthropometrically speaking, his body has been defined as quote-unquote super negroid. This is the description given to.
So the quote unquote supranegroid you'll find in Professor Gay Robbins' reports, of which I think there are 2 done on the ancient Egyptian limb proportions, and they're done of pharaonic mummies, not randomers, okay? And also Sonia Zakrzewski, okay? They all quoted the fact that it's almost impossible to dispute that these limb proportions that the ancient Egyptians had fell in line with modern black populations. That's agreed.
The limb ratios found almost exclusively amongst tropical Africans and the African diaspora. In summary, the differences seen in tropical Africans when compared to European and Asian groups is characterized in a comparatively shorter torso, a much longer arm span, and a longer tibia in relation to the length of the femur. These proportions are typically seen in all native African populations, but are particularly pronounced in populations along the Nile, including the ancient Egyptians. In the study titled The Physical Proportions.
I just wanted to pause it there. Just a little random side note that I'm going to throw out.
These proportions are typically seen in all native African populations, but are particularly pronounced in populations along the Nile.
Nydia, who I mentioned earlier, has done an amazing reconstruction of this fella on the left. Amazing. One of the best reconstructions I've seen. It's really brilliant. I would never have thought to make a reconstruction from a statue like this. To me, I would have said to myself, that's not enough detail for me to approach a reconstruction. She's somehow done it and knocked out of the park. Obviously on the right we have Amos Nefertari, who I've done a reconstruction of, and I would say that's one of my best reconstructions. So if you haven't checked out my reconstruction of Amos Nefertari, if you want the most recent up-to-date version, check out my Instagram and you'll see a very recent up-to-date version of Amos Nefertari that I'm really proud of, but I think is a very, very true depiction of her face given the artifacts that we have.
Including the ancient Egyptians. In the study titled The Physical Proportions and Living Stature of New Kingdom Pharaohs, Egyptologist Professor Gay Robbins concluded that
the limbs of the pharaohs, like those of other ancient Egyptians, had negroid characteristics in that the distal segments were relatively long in comparison to the proximal segments.
Further to this table of tibiofemoral indices show how little the bodily proportions of the pharaohs deviate from modern black Africans in relation to white Eurasians, allowing researchers to accurately estimate bone lengths and bodily proportions from a single bone utilizing the quote-unquote Negro equations. The significance of this cannot be understated. The study proved that ancient Egyptian rulers had identical limb proportions to those seen in modern East Africans, much like the distance runners of East Africa, renowned for exactly what you can see exhibited on the artwork and on the mummies of the ancients, with no better example than on the body and statues of Tut himself, who, according to Robbins, was
So here's what's interesting as well. I'm going to let that play because I think it speaks for itself. But here's what's really interesting. It's really important when we look at the artwork. Yes, we do know that ancient Egyptians did stylize some of the artwork. But when you look at what I call high fidelity portraiture like this funerary statue here is high fidelity portraiture. What do I mean? I mean, we know that this is physically from head to toe proportionate to a living human being. The detail on this statue, everything in terms of the size of the feet, the size of the limbs, everything is proportionate to a modern human being. We can agree that. We can look at this and say, this is not a stylized piece of art. This is a portrait. This was supposed to resemble someone. This clearly was to the point where he's got a tiny little pouch at the bottom of his stomach. This is clearly the depiction of a human being. Not only is this person clearly an African, but they have African limb proportions. Okay, these aren't proportions that you'll see readily on someone who is not a melanated African on the continent. These are proportions that you will see in Africa amongst certain groups, you know, to this day, 100%. You won't find someone with these bodily proportions, with this presentation, with these lips. You won't find them anywhere but amongst black people. So the fact that we even have to have this discussion, the fact that you're able to conclusively turn around and say, we know that Julius Caesar looked like this based on one statue you found in some random riverbed somewhere far, far away from Rome, and just decided that that's Julius Caesar. Yeah. But you have all of these retrieved from the tomb of Tut himself, and you say, well, all of this was just a stylistic artwork. It wasn't realistic. What part of this statue is not a realistic human being? Someone please tell me. Because it looks like a very real human being to me. I think that what they struggle with is the fact that this is clearly an African. That's what the issue is.
Anthropometrically super African. So much so that when the Negro equations were used to calculate the height of the king based on separate measurements of his femur, tibia, and humerus, it was found that all three estimations produced exactly the same height estimate of 1.69 meters, substantiating the efficacy of the Negro equation.
What's interesting now as well, when I looked at Zahi Hawass's recent study on Tutankhamun, they've adjusted his height down now to, I think, 1.63 centimeters. And the only thing that I can think of is that Hawass is refusing to utilize the Negro equation. That's the only thing I can think of. Now, why would I think that that's the case? The reason I think that's the case is because the Negro equation shows that doesn't matter which bone measurement you take, i.e. the tibia, the femur, or the humerus, and those are the three that they measured, the three parts of his body that they measured, it gave them exactly the same. Did I miss your super chat, Surfactant? I'll go back and I'll find it. Sorry. It doesn't matter if you take any of those bones separately, if you run them through the quote unquote Negro equation, i.e. the equation that you'd run a approximate black person through, although obviously we know we're very diverse, but taken on their word, every single time it would give you that exact height of 1.69 meters. Yeah, that's the proof that something works. Okay, that's the proof that this is proportionately what this person is. Now, the fact that Hawass has now changed Tutankhamun's height by 6 centimeters, which is substantial, by the way, by the fact that Hawass has changed Tutankhamun's height down to, I think, 1.63 now, I can only think that he's refusing to utilize the formula that you know, Robbins, for instance, used because of this Negro equation problem that he wants to ignore. That would be what makes sense to me, and that would be very typical of Hawass to do something like that. Let me find Surfactant's super chat. I know you said it's okay, but I don't want to miss what you've put out there. How far back was it? Don't worry, we'll get there. In fact, I can change it to starred. There we go. Okay. Yeah, there it is. Sorry about that. Thank you, Surfactant, for your $5 donation, my guy. It was a long time ago. He said we know they're lying. They know they're lying, but they still lie. Absolutely. 100% the case. 100% the case. And thank you very much for that donation. I'm sorry I didn't see it on time. Appreciate you, man. Let's carry on. Where were we? Yeah, let's carry on. So that's my thoughts regarding the Hawass. And I think I'm correct in that regard, because I know what that dude's like. He's got a whole nation's delusion to uphold. So, you know, it's not an easy job being Zahi Hawass.
And proving that his body was proportionally a precise match to other black Africans of the same height. Running these same estimations with a non-African would have produced 3 very different height estimates. This means the distal segments of the king's body could only produce a proportionate black African or Negroid body, and thus were not compatible to produce any kind of proportionate Eurasian.
So just to be clear, if anyone missed that point, it's very key, okay? Only when you run Tutankhamun's bones through the Negro equation did you get the same height, which is what you would look for. In other words, if they found your, God forbid, but if they found your skeleton tomorrow, okay, and they wanted to find out maybe which, you know, ethnic group you belong to, they could utilize some of these equations. So they would measure your, you know, maybe your, let's say your femur. So let's say they measured your femur, okay, and they estimated your height to be, I don't know, 1.6 meters or whatever, but they thought that you were white, okay. But then when they measure your tibia in relation to your femur using the equation, it should throw up an error, because kind of like, well, actually this is making the guy now super tall because we've used the wrong equation, and now it's different to the initial height. And then they measure another part of you, your humerus, and they realize, oh no, we're way off now, okay. However, if they run you through an equation and they get the same height on all 3 bones that are measured separately, then you're like, okay, bang, we've got the right ethnicity for this person. That's how it works. It's really simple. That's how it works. So you can't disprove the measuring work that was already done, even if your name's Zahi Hawass. You can't just disprove it, ignore it, and change it and decide it's not good enough, okay? Because it's already proven itself to be effective. You know, that's it. End of discussion.
The final area of investigation concerns genetics. This area is particularly loaded with substantial misrepresentations and false conclusions being drawn from very limited data and inadequate sampling around the subject of ancient Egypt as a whole. Some recent, poorly conducted studies have attempted to associate ancient Egyptians with Near Eastern origins by sampling from burial grounds occupied by foreigners and drawing conclusions about race and affinity by the deliberate misclassification of markers.
And I have to say this as well. I really despise Johannes Krauss. I think he has a really sinister agenda, and I'm coming for him. I really am. I've got work to do because he's obviously an incredibly educated man in terms of his field of genetics. He's very highly thought after, but I don't think there's anything objective or non-agendaed in what he's doing. I think he's been given a very clear agenda and a very clear path in terms of what he does, and I think he's very, very dishonest. So obviously we've come at this study, the Schoenemann study, I think we've come at it quite well. We've managed to break down its multiple errors and flaws, but I think there's a more exhaustive piece to be done. That really, really puts to bed some of these really poor analysis of ancient Egyptian genomic data. And it's important that we do this because, you know, they're using these, and they deliberately use very limited studies. They don't, like I said, the people they should be testing, such as the pharaonic lineages, why do you think they don't go near the New Kingdom anymore? How is it that over from the late 80s to the early 2000s, we had all of these limb proportions, skull measurements, all done on the New Kingdom mummies, yeah? And yet now, 2025 and beyond, where we've got next generation sequencing, they refuse. Zahi Hawass refuses to touch the New Kingdom pharaohs. Even, in fact, he refuses to touch any pharaohs. He does not allow the genetic testing of any pharaohs to be done. Why do you think that is the case? I'll tell you one of the cases, you know the answer. The case is that they've already tested the New Kingdom pharaohs. And even when they let out that little snippet of STR profiling, which we're going to cover in this, people were able to ascertain, hey, these people have got really African DNA. I mean, like super African DNA. I mean, these guys have got deep, bliggity, deep African DNA. And he's terrified. So he won't let them test you. What he'll allow, though, is he'll allow these teams to dig up random mummies. Are you guys aware that the Fayum district, the mummies from the Fayum district aren't mummies, they're cadavers? A lot of people don't even realize a lot of these people in this first Schunemann study weren't even mummified. They were cadavers. How native Egyptian can you be if you haven't even gone through the process of mummification? Then a lot of people don't realize that the Fayum mummies, mummies from that district in that period, a whole bunch of them are not mummified. They're just cadavers. So they're just grabbing DNA from basically skeletons that are wrapped in fabric. But they won't tell you that. They'll make it seem like, oh, thanks. Look at the time. Running out of disk space. Thank you. Cheers. I had no idea, but I do now on a live. Cheers. But they won't tell you that, because Zayawas is fine for these people to run around digging up popping up random, bodies from the desert and making conclusions, because he knows what the pharaonic DNA says. He's very aware of what it says.
However, we will focus on the few studies that have provided us with data about Tutankhamun himself. These studies utilize autosomal or whole genome DNA, giving us a much richer picture of the subjects tested. From 2012 through to 2018, different independent researchers utilized the STR markers obtained from the Amarna lineage by Zahi Hawass and his team. The 2010 study, titled Ancestry and Pathology in King Tutankhamun's Family, is one of very few studies to publish verified genetic data from actual pharaonic lineages, and thus
Zahi Hawass regrets nothing more in his life than publishing the autosomal data of this new kingdom dynastic lineage. He regrets nothing more. This has been the bane of his existence, and this is why he'll never do it again. He'll never do it again.
Thus, leave no ambiguity regarding the authenticity of the specimens being sampled. They are confirmed as indigenous Egyptians. The study sought to establish the relationship between the exhumed royal mummies from the 18th dynasty. It has been noted in numerous studies that the power of STR analysis comes from looking at multiple STR loci simultaneously.
Short tandem repeat, or STR, is a region of DNA composed of a short sequence of nucleotides repeated many times. Since the number of repeated sequences in a given STR varies from person to person, pinpointing these variants can be useful in DNA fingerprinting. As the name implies, the repeated stretches in STRs are short, only 2 to 10 base pairs long. For this reason, and because they are dispersed more evenly throughout the genome than the longer variable number tandem repeats, or VNTRs, STRs are favored by forensic labs. Large databases of information on STRs in the general population tell analysts how much variation exists at any given STR location. That information can help forensic analysts determine the conclusiveness of a match between two samples. If 10% of people have the same number of repeats at a given STR, for example, finding a match at that site is merely suggestive that two samples are a match. If two sites with the same prevalence match, the odds drop to 1 in 100 that the similarity is coincidental. If 13 sites match, the odds that any two people would possess such a fingerprint are so small, about 1 in 10 trillion, that the result can be considered a definitive match.
Hence, in the publishing of this data, researchers were armed with the tools needed to narrow the field and effectively group this royal lineage alongside populations carrying a similar genetic signature. Following this, in 2000...
So I hope that was useful. Obviously, I didn't do that video. I referenced it. I think it's like an Italian channel, found it a little while ago. But I think it does a really good job at explaining how STR analysis works. And I think that was quite clear. So you're looking for matches in terms of the tandem repeats. And when you get sequential number of matches, then it can start to be really clear that you're dealing with either the same person or related people. And one of the arguments you'll hear is that, oh, well, they only published 8 of, a possible of 13 or 15 STR base pairs here. But you saw already how far up 8 gets you in that, that little table. So maybe by the time you've got a match along 8 STRs between 2 individuals, there's like a 1 in 100 million chance that they're not the same person. Now, we know that's not obviously super conclusive for a one-to-one match, but when we're talking about populations, that's more than sufficient. We're saying, when you're talking about 2 groups of populations, it's like, well, look, this population has this many of these here in terms of like across the population. You don't need everyone matching everything, but you just need to see a repeating frequency amongst the population of certain things to be able to say, well, it's present here and it's not present here. It's a really easy way to rule out populations and to rule in populations. And that's what's done with STR profiling on a population level. So yeah.
2012 and 2014, independent DNA company DNA Tribes utilized the same DNA results that were published by Hawass and Co. during the 2010 study. They processed the DNA results through an extensive global database to establish his affinity with modern populations. When the results of the Amarna lineage STR markers were run through this matching algorithm, they found that not only King Tutankhamun, but all of the Amarna lineage possessed a substantial match affinity with indigenous continental Black Africans.
And just to explain how this works for some of you who might be looking at these numbers. So that number represents the likelihood, times 1 of it being a match to this population than any other population in the world. So let me explain. This is basically saying King Tutankhamun is 1,500 times more likely to be a Southern African based on his STR analysis than he is to be a group or population that has a 1. Okay, so maybe like probably Britain would probably have a 1. So he's 1,500 times, not 1,500%, 1,500 times more likely. That's as a percentage. $150,000. It's either 1.5 million percent or 150,000% more likely. 1,500 times more likely to be a Southern African than any other group. But you can do comparisons between 2 populations here, because if you get 1,500 and you get, let's take modern North African, okay, so this would be your modern Egyptian here, 6 into 1,500, I don't know, what's that, 300? About 300 times more likely to be a Southern African. 300 times, not 300%, 300 times more likely to be from the south of Africa than he is to be from modern North Africa. It's not even a comparison to be had. That's like off the spectrum. He belongs in this population. Okay, off the spectrum. These are massive differentiations. Okay, and if you have a look at here, King Tutankhamun was actually one of ironically the most African, even though all of them are unequivocally clustered amongst Southern African, followed by Great Lakes, followed by Tropical West African, which was just surprised some people because Tropical West African actually rates quite significantly significantly higher than Horn of Africa. And I think that will surprise a lot of people. But this is what the STR profiling says. Even higher than Sahelian. Okay, so this relationship that exists between Southern Africa, Africa's Great Lakes, and tropical West African seems to heavily favor the New Kingdom dynastic lineage. And this is something that people need to, who are just perhaps practicing that kind of like lookership and don't understand how much manipulation has been done to separate ancient Egypt from its, cross-continental African relationship. Okay? Continental African relationship. I believe that if you're going to ask me, I would say all of these Africans contribute heavily to the ancient Egyptian, or benefited heavily from the ancient Egyptian, however you want to say it, because ancient Egyptian, I guess, is the proto-civilization to many of. If you look at a lot of these civilizations, Southern African, African Great Lakes, tropical West African, Horn of Africa, and Sahelian, all head and shoulders above anything below them, i.e. Levantine, Aegean, Arabian. The gap is massive. So we're talking about whole African representation. And bear in mind, this is just the New Kingdom. So I can't make conclusions about other dynasties, but it's important that we have a understanding of what's being presented here.
Results indicated the autosomal S.
Hi guys, I've got to close down some windows. I've got to close down some windows because my PC's run out of memory. That warning I got wasn't a red herring in the end. It wasn't a red herring. It was like, dude, I'm gonna shut you down. Yeah, I don't have any memory. So just bear with me as I respect my PC a little bit and close some of this down. Oh, the timing is wonderful. Wunderbar. PC doesn't ever shy up on the opportunity to embarrass me on a live stream. Tell you, there's just no letting up here. All right. I think we're back. I think I've closed enough windows to I hope I've closed enough window to get my stream back. It's Google Chrome. I don't like to play with this whole. Here we go. That should make a dent. All right, let's give it a try. I'm going to try and get it back. We're near the end now anyway, because straight after this genetics area finishes, I'm going to go into my big announcement. So I'm glad you guys are still with me. Still got 220 on the stream, so we've managed to maintain that number. Let me share my screen so we can wrap this up and I can share my news with you guys. Okay, I think we're back. Everyone good? I will back up my PC, don't worry. Most of my stuff is live. It's my phone I really need to back up. Let's carry on. I'm going to just bring this back a couple seconds and hope for the best.
Africans.
Results indicated the autosomal STR profiles of the Amarna period mummies were most frequent in modern populations in several parts of Africa. These results are based on the 8 STR markers for which these pharaonic mummies have been tested, which allow a preliminary geographical analysis for these individuals who lived in Egypt during the Amarna period of the 14th century BCE. Although results do not necessarily suggest exclusively African ancestry, geographical analysis suggests ancestral links with neighboring populations in Africa for the studied pharaonic mummies. If new data become available in the future, it might become possible to further clarify results and shed new light on the relationships of ancient individuals to modern populations.
Using the available data, the results of the analysis indicated that King Tutankhamun was 1,300 to 1,500 times more likely to find a match amongst southern region Africans than anywhere else in the world. Even more specifically, he was over 200 times more likely to be a genetic match to modern Africans in the Great Lakes region than modern North Africans currently residing in Egypt. The results of the analysis carried out by DNA Tribes was objective and transparent, without agenda. It was based on published data, and it's important to note the process is entirely repeatable by any organization or researchers with access to an STR database, although it should be noted since only 8 out of 13 loci were obtained.
Just quickly, before it goes to our next point, repeatable process, STR profiling doesn't require loads and loads of subjective analysis, as you'll find is the case when it comes to population genetics when linked to SNPs, which is the single nucleotide polymorphisms. Those are purely interpretation based. Even a lot of these tables of these phylogenetic tables that people rely so much upon, which tell you this marker comes from this and this marker comes from that, a lot of that is purely subjective, based on what is a rudimentary and many times incorrect understanding of historical anthropology. If people understood the history of the world differently, they will draw up those phylogenetic tables completely differently. That's really important to note. But we'll come on to that anyway. Thank you very much, Wildflower, for your £5 donation. Big up yourself. Said great live stream, King. Thank you very much. Always lovely to have you policing the stream. So yeah, there you go.
Which is a less than.
I'm going to read this comment as well, because I think this is actually quite an important comment. I've just read it now and I actually think it's worth mentioning. Okay. African features tend to be rounder. This includes those from the Horn of Africa. Not all Ethiopians have narrower features or lighter skin. The media only focuses on specific phenotypes. I agree with you, Maureen. And I would say it's not just the media. I think a lot of Africans and a lot of melanated people outside of Africa do exactly the same. I can't tell you the amount of times people have come to me and said stuff like, "Oh, Ethiopians aren't that dark." And I'm like, what are you talking about? Ethiopia has the darkest people on the planet. Literally the darkest people on the planet. The darkest people on the planet are the Dinka, and the second darkest people on the planet are the Omotic. Okay, you won't find darker people than the Omotic people. And people act like there's this single phenotype that's produced by Ethiopia. Yes, there's a dominant phenotype that people have been presented with, but you have to go, or at least have friends from, or at least be bothered to really investigate what goes on in African nations, because people don't understand the diversity. And the reason I've put this comment on the screen is because the African phenotype that people associate with tropical or Central/West Africans is the one that they always treat as the other. It's not that it's not present. In fact, you could find loads of West African looking Africans in all along the Nile, okay? But they're treated as the other. They're treated as not representative of that region because of modern biases against that specific phenotype. You have it all across Africa. I'll show you Igbo men. I was looking at a photo today of, in fact, a video today of an Igbo man who looks, I kid you not, he just looks straight up Asian. Like, if you didn't know, you would just assume this dude is like 100% like, you know, Chinese ancestry, you know, slightly darker, like Vietnamese, you know, slightly darker, kind of like Malay, slightly looking. Okay, Vietnamese. This guy's 100% Igbo. And here's what's ironic. I've got Yoruba uncles who look like this man. Epicantic folds, everything. Light skin, epicantic folds, just looking like, randomly, just looking like Chinese people in the middle of Nigeria. People don't understand. This is why I say when people try and kind of compare European diversity to African diversity, I just really laugh. I really laugh because, like, you guys have got no idea. You've got no idea. You just present these phenotypes and you've got all of these Eurocentrics who pretend that they're not Eurocentric. Okay, probably like that person who was in the stream earlier. Pretend they're not Eurocentric and they like fawn after the Horn of Africa. Oh, well, the Horn of Africa, they're like Eurasians. All that. No, they're not. First of all, no, they're not. And secondly, you're just presenting the part of the Horn that you're comfortable with. You're ignoring the large part of the Horn that are super bliggity black people, the blackest people you'll find on the planet in nations like Somalia, Ethiopia, I've already mentioned. People that are darker than any Nigerian you will ever find in these nations. And you're just ignoring them because they're not convenient, or you don't understand the phenotypic diversity that exists throughout Africa. So a lot of people just really need to reschool themselves. And this is not just Eurocentrism I'm talking about. This is a lot. Sometimes I find there's a lot of channels out there. They fetishize the, you know, a certain look, you know, from certain regions, from, you know, certain parts of East Africa. And they act like that's it. You know, Ethiopians look like this. And it's like, no, they don't. And it's like it's almost the same as there's that idiotic channel, Ancestral Brew, who's like, Coptics, and then he gets these pictures of these pale people. It's like, that's not representative of Copts. There are loads of black Copts. In fact, black Copts are probably more dominant than the tan Coptic Egyptians. But a lot of people don't realize that, because these people put out these fake agenda-driven, you know, phenotypically narrow representations of what these groups of people are. And I find it very, very, very frustrating. So thank you very much for that contribution, Maureen. I think it was very timely and necessary.
Ideal range. This did present a limitation, since results were not as robust as would have been achievable with more of the loci available. Hence, it was stated by the authors of the study,
these regional matches do not necessarily indicate an exclusively African ancestry for the Amarna pharaonic family. However, results indicate these ancient individuals inherited some alleles that today are more frequent in populations of Africa than in other parts of the world, such as D18S5119 and D21S1134.
In summary, in spite of there still being the possibility of more or less additional outside contribution revealed by further loci, it is still clear that the Amarna lineage is significantly weighted towards signatures that are far more frequent in Central, Southern, and Western Africa than anywhere else. In support of this, in a further study titled Ancient Egyptian Genomes from Northern Egypt, Further Discussion, published by Jean-Philippe Gourdin et al. In 2018, researchers utilized the same genetic data, but utilized a publicly available STR population database called POP Affiliator. The analysis only confirmed what had already been identified by DNA tribes. The analysis confirmed the Amarna lineage to be on average a 70 to 94% match probability to modern populations in Central Africa, in comparison to a 0 to 31% match probability for Eurasian and Asian populations. Once again, if we focus in on the STR profile of King Tutankhamun,
so it's really important to note, let me just actually...
we find a 93.9% match probability for modern Central Africans.
I've talked about this before. I'm going to once again restate this. The reason why this particular study used the phrase sub-Saharan African is because this was a direct response to Johannes Krauss's study. So this was done by Keita and Jourdain in response to Johannes Krauss's study, that Schunemann study that they still like to quote from to this day. This was to say, hey, look, you've found those random mummies in the Fayum, you know, these random cadavers that you've dug out of the desert in a foreign tombs, foreign-owned tombs and foreign periods. But we have actual pharaonic DNA, actual kings and queens of ancient Egypt. And hey, this was their DNA results. And hey, just to use your terminology, since you like to call Black Africans sub-Saharan, well, this is how close these people were to sub-Saharan Africans. 93.9% King Tutankhamun was his likelihood of being sub-Saharan. That's his probability of being a sub-Saharan. 94%. 4.6% of being Eurasian. And Eurasian, he's grouped together all of those groups that they love, those Caucasoid groups. He's put them all into a nice, large, chunky group for them. And that entire group only added up to 4.6%. Not even a debate. Not even a debate. And this is why they rely solely on new DNA studies. Oh, we need new DNA. Oh, let's dig up some cadavers. Oh, we found this in the western desert of Egypt. We found this, you know, this set of bones. You know, they can't tell you if that set of bones was some invader who got a spear, who got an arrow through the heart from Tarpajet, a Tarsetian arrow through the heart and died. They won't tell you that. But they'll say, oh, yeah, we've run some DNA analysis. And hey, look, he clusters closely alongside Syrians. Well, that's good for him. This is what pharaonic DNA looks like. Read it and weep. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to change. Hawass knows what pharaonic DNA looks like. Yeah? Hawass knows what pharaonic DNA looks like. It looks like this. It looks really, really indisputably native Black African. There's nothing else there's nothing you can do about it. You can't change that. You're not going to go back in time and change their DNA. That's where it clusters. And this is the problem that they have. They're going to come up with any new studies that they want, but they can't undo the DNA that's already been done.
In comparison to a 4.6% match probability with modern Eurasians and North Africans. So let's consider all of the evidence in summation. First, we have his numerous portraits, in particular those in which the color is preserved.
Okay. So
next,
I'm not going to do this summary, okay? Because that's kind of the end of the video. It goes into some more really cool stuff. And actually, I'm going to leave that visual on the screen, okay? Because I know that's going to butthurt a lot of people who want to claim Tutankhamun. Look, have a look what Tutankhamun looks like, yeah? Have a look at what Tutankhamun looks like.
His hypernilotic cranium.
Yeah, how's that little collection? So let's try and get a nice still screen of Tutankhamun.
First, we have his numerous portraits, in particular those in which the color is preserved. Next,
let's just use the little arrow. Oh no, it's too far. How do you do a small step? Someone was telling me the other day. No, that's not how you do it. Maybe control. No, that's not how you do it. Oh, I'll play and pause.
Next, his hypernilotic.
Okay, cool. There we go. There. That's what I wanted to do. All right. There. How's that? Yeah. How's that? If you've got a problem with King Tutankhamun's appearance have a look at this beautiful little screenshot of his artwork overlaid. Firstly, you'll note, well, at least I know, it's the same individual. Do we all agree that this looks like the same person? They don't look drastically different. Looks like the same dude. Yeah. Secondly, we'll agree he has quite a consistent portrayal of complexion. Okay. Deep, rich brown. A color that I think we'd all agree is pretty much dead center of the race we'd call Black African. Okay. Pretty much dead center. Someone who would easily classify as a sub-Saharan. Yeah. Do we agree? Yeah. Is it hard to imagine what this man's face looked like, what this young boy looked like based on this lovely collage of images? If you still struggle, okay, or if you're like that dude who came in the chat a second ago talking about, oh, the DNA don't agree, mate. Obviously, he hadn't seen what King Tutankhamun's DNA actually looks like. His DNA looks like this, looks like his face. Yeah, his face looks like his face. His limb proportions look like his face. His craniometrics look like his face. Everything about Tutankhamun looks like what you see on the screen now. This is his appearance. A dark-skinned African boy, not that difficult. Okay, really, really, really simple. Okay. We don't have to do any jumping about. Okay, we don't have to do any mental gymnastics. It's all pretty straightforward. I think we could agree. I'm going to park the video there. Okay, I hope you guys have found that really enjoyable, because I want to share with you my news, because it's now 12:10. It's pretty late here. I'm pretty sure my UK viewers have already logged off. So now I've got something relatively exciting to share with you. Okay, so no one switch off. We've got 216 online, and I don't expect to lose a single person. Okay, guys, so let me know that you're still here. Hit a 1 in the chat. And actually, no, in fact, don't hit a 1 in the chat to let me know you're here. Hit a 1 in the chat to let me know that you are excited about the news I'm about to give you. I need to know you're excited, otherwise I just won't bother. I need to know that you are, do you want to hear this news? Okay, so you're still awake. Okay, I'm getting a few ones. Good. Put a 1 in the chat. If you don't normally put a 1 in, put a 1 in. If you've never put a 1 before, if you've never even made it known that you're in my live stream before, I'm just going to implore you right now to type a 1 for me. Love it. Seeing a couple of new faces. It's nice to see people who I haven't seen before. Put a 1 in here. I got 215 here online. Put a 1. Even if you're a hater, put a 1 in the chat. Okay. Even if you're a troll, just put a 1 in the chat really quickly. This is nice. Loving it. Superb audience. Amazing. All right. So let me share some news with you guys. So I had to make my screen small there. I'm just going to get the right screen on before I pull it back up. Okay. No, don't need that to play. Let's close that. Okay, you're still here. Fantastic. Just going to get the news up on the screen, and then we're going to get cracking together. Or maybe I had it up and I closed it down to stop my PC from crashing. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So no worries, we'll find it. Okay, all right. News is on its way. Sorry about the little delay, guys. I'm sure. Well, I want to see. I'm sure many of you, most of you, will have no idea what this news is, because I didn't know what this news was up until very recently. But here we go. Thank you, those of you who are putting the comments in there as well, especially first timers. It's so nice to have you, and I'm glad to have you here on a live. Okay, because you're here for a very special live. I would say arguably one of the most special lives I've ever done. So I'm gonna, without any further ado, show you the news. So here it is. It's on the screen. Okay, this is the news. All right, this is my big news. And yes, I think the time has come. All right, I am going to be releasing a volume. Okay, this is my book called Reconstructing Egypt. Now, I want to take you guys through a bit of how I got here, because it actually hasn't been a very, very long journey. Some of you are saying, I said it, got a few wow, nice, good stuff, a lot of excitement. Great. I'm glad to hear that, because I'm glad I'm glad that you guys are interested in it, because otherwise what's the point in doing it? I'm going to tell you what my motivation was, actually, because there was a journey that got me here. And I think the tale of the journey is actually really important that I share it with you, so you can understand exactly what you're going to be getting in this volume. It's partially written already. And without giving too much away, I think its delivery will be September, by the looks of things. And it's a very unique but important book. Okay, so it's a really unique but also a very important book, I feel. And I'm going to tell you what the motive was to me creating this book now, before I kind of go through everything with you. Just bear with me 1 second as I quickly reload the screens that I had ready, and I had to close down because my PC wouldn't have it. It was trying to remember what window. Yes, this window. Give me 1 second as I. So I'm going to share an email with you guys, all right? And this email kind of highlights what drove me here. I'm trying to obscure the person's identity though. So just give me 1 second as I do this. Okay, brilliant. Okay, there. So I've obscured the person's identity, and I'm going to read this email to you now. Great, super. So I think everyone can see the email on the screen now, but you can't see the person's identity, which is important. All right, but I'm going to read it to you, and then hopefully you guys are going to get a good idea as to how I got where I am at the moment. So he basically said, here's some books I've read so far: The Destruction of Black Civilization, The African Origin of Civilization. So Destruction of Black Civilization is Chancellor Williams. The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality, is Sheikh Anta Diop. And Pre-Colonial Black Africa, Sheikh Anta Diop. All three books I own. I actually got 2 copies of this one by accident, but you know, it is what it is. Love it. But either which way, they're 3 really strong volumes in terms of basically entering the field of, entering the realm of beginning to understand your history from an African perspective and not being fed with Eurocentric nonsense. The issue is, and it's not so much an issue, but it's something that needs to be highlighted, that these books are like 50, 60 years old in the case of Destruction of Black Civilization, are quite dated. Not dated as in they're outdated, they're not. I would encourage everyone to read it, but they have been around for some time. And I feel like there's a lot of new information, a lot of new understanding, a lot of new fields that have been crossed and are things that need to be addressed today that haven't been addressed. And this is kind of where I thought to myself, this is important. So I'm going to read the rest of this email. It says, these have granted me, this is what this person wrote, emailed and said to me. These books, he said, have granted me enormous amount of information that school could have ever provided. There are plenty of arguments, most being disprovable, or most that you can't disprove. I think that's what he means to say there regarding Caucasoid. Oh no, most being disprovable regarding Caucasoid origin that I myself have more than enough info to see the lie-in. So he's talking about the fact that people make up these Caucasoid arguments and they're pretty rubbish, pretty easy to dissuade. Yeah, we know that's the case. It says, however, I still find myself lacking a certain amount of information. Do you have any sources regarding the Cranometric studies of ancient Egyptian mummies, in addition to other pieces of supporting evidence towards Black Africans' role in being the progenitors of Kemet that I can read to expand my knowledge? I would appreciate the knowledge share. Thank you. Okay, so a really good question that I appreciated from someone, and one that I unfortunately had to answer this way. So let me quickly scroll down to show you what my response was. All right. Once again, I'm just trying to take it off screen because I just wanted to obscure any kind of like, say, names so you don't know who this is. So this is my response. So I want you to all pay attention to this really quickly. So I said here, thanks for reaching out, and it's a great question you ask. What I found is that books will tend to give you more generalized and accessible knowledge. However, when it comes to more targeted anthropological studies, we are dependent on research papers and published studies. So in other words, I've got a plethora of books like the ones I've mentioned there, but a majority of my books aren't centered around the African perspective. A majority of my books are just general Egyptological books. You know, I've got, just reaching to my right now, I've got, you know, more out there books, Science of the Dogon. Then I'll have like the New Complete Authentic Universal System of Geography. This is like a really old kind of like Encyclopedia Britannica. Obviously, Book of the Dead. These are just books in grabbing reach, by the way. Like my studio is a mess. I've got books everywhere. Genesis of the Pharaohs by Toby Wilkinson. Anacalypsis, Godfrey Higgins. You can see it's a veritable mishmash of just books everywhere saying completely different things. Forensic facial reconstruction, Scanning the Pharaohs by Hawass. I mean, I'm not going to go through all the books that I have here. I'm not showing off. I've got hundreds of books. But the point being that they're general books. None of these books are going to give you a definitive breakdown of was Tutankhamun black, for instance. None of them are going to do that. You're just going to have to get bits of information from one, bits of information from the other, and start to string it together. We are very dependent on our analysis of primary and secondary data because we don't have 200 years of historical falsification for us to fall on like the Eurocentrists do. Do you understand? So yeah, let me carry on reading my response. I said, published studies are often not always less opinionated than books, and so leave room for different people to analyze these findings, like myself and other independent researchers do, often making this information more accessible and digestible to the general public. And this is why I showed you the Was Tutankhamun Black presentation that I've done, because it does just that, I feel. But the downside is it means I can't really recommend a book that covers everything that you're interested in. You know, he's asked me specifically about, you know, anthropological information, you know, something basically a little bit more modern to the books that he's read already. I said there are a plethora of books that will give you knowledge on the pharaohs and the civilization, but not necessarily from an African perspective, meaning you'll need to read between the lines. Egypt Revisited, that's another book I've got right here. I always have that in grabbing range. Really good book. Egypt Revisited is a good generalized book, but more of what you've already consumed. Egypt Revisited is actually multiple books kind of like put together into a single volume. Lots of different authors in that. It's very good if you haven't read that already. Sorry if that isn't helpful. Perhaps if you're more specific about a particular area of study, I could recommend a shortlist. So I sent this email and I had been as helpful as I could, but I was immediately dissatisfied in my response, because I was like, why don't we have anything that's kind of like next, that came after these great, we know the great kind of like scholars that kind of trailblaze. We know our Joseph Ben Jochanans, our Sheikh Anta Diops, our Ivan van Sertima's, our John Henrik Clark's, our Chancellor Williams, etc., etc. We know we've got loads of really fantastic and great. $750, bloody hell! Sorry, I just saw that. We know we've got a ton of really great scholars who did a fantastic job putting together resources for us. But like I said, we're approaching nearly half a century from the height of the works that they produced, and it's now, I feel, it's time for updated works. I'm not saying that people aren't producing works, but I just said at that point, after I wrote this email, I kind of said, or at least I felt like I heard a call from the ancestors to say, you need to write your book. You need to put what you know into a volume that's accessible, that people can get their hands on, and that's going to be a continuation. And that really is my calling point. My focus point is that I want this to build on the research that great scholars like Sheikh Anta Diop have already done. Also, I know my limitations, so a lot of my work is going to be focused in and around the region of artwork, reconstructions, and anthropology. Those are my strong areas. Those are my focus points, and so that's where I'm going to be placing my attention. I just realized I've missed the donation, so big shout going out to Deshawn. Thank you, Deshawn, for your very generous donation. It says excellent, and I said thank you. That's a very generous donation. That will go a long way, and it does feel like excellent time. So I'm gonna be doing it in my book. Absolutely, it's time for me to say it's my one day you're gonna see me on Joe Rogan, and I'm gonna do that just for you guys. I'm gonna be on Joe Rogan talking about black civilizations, you know, black civilizations that have been whitewashed, and he's gonna be like, yeah, but Joe Rogan's like, yeah, but do you have any pictures, man? And I'm gonna be like, yes, it's in my book. It's in my book. Yes, in my book. Read my book. I'm definitely gonna do that. There's no way that's not gonna happen now. I'm sorry. Thank you for that. But yeah, thank you for that donation. So this is where I'm going to move on to how we get there. So this is a page that I've set up. I'll put the link. I'll give you guys the link now. This is a page I've set up on my website about the book launch. Like I said, the book isn't ready yet. It should be ready by September. And I've decided to do a Kickstarter, not starting yet, by the way. It says 1 day, but I think I'm going to increase this to a week for everyone who's looking on the page at the moment. I think I'm going to start the Kickstarter in about a week's time. So I'm probably going to have it start on Sunday or Monday. Okay. So it's going to start on probably Sunday or Monday, the Kickstarter. So yeah, when that's going to start, and when that launches, you're going to be able to pre-order the book. So you'll be able to get the so basically make sure you have your copy. I'll be obviously offering discounts to people who take part in the pre-sale, because it gives me an opportunity to start the book and to obviously dedicate time to it, to build revenue, to hopefully close up shop on everything else that I'm doing. If I get enough interest, my channel will, I have to pre-warn you, my channel will go quiet like it did when I was writing that paper. My channel will go quiet for a couple of months while I'm putting this together. The good thing is I don't have to write loads of stuff from scratch. I've got lots of research done and lots of stuff written already that's going to contribute to the content. So I know it's not going to be an arduous task for me to get. You can get signed copies. There's got to be different tiers, so you can get just a copy if you want to get something outdoor. There's digital copies available. I want this book to be available to everyone, by the way, so the digital versions are going to be really cheap, really cheap, because I want everyone to be able to get this book. But if you want the physical copy, there'll be, depending on paperback or hardback, what kind of quality you want, there'll be different prices. So there'll be a version or something out there, hopefully that's accessible to everyone. I'll also probably let my current patrons and members have some kind of exclusive discounts and tiers available, because I kind of have to, because those guys, I can't express them enough. Those guys really do sustain my upkeep, particularly when I've got a suppressed channel. So I really do rely on my patrons and my channel members. So you guys, I might not say it all the time, but I'm very grateful to you, because yeah, you literally sustain me. So I will make sure that there is a bit of an additional available to you. But regardless of if you are a member or patron or a subscriber or none of the above, there should be something in the pre-sale that is basically up your street. Purchasing on the pre-sale obviously will help me to get the book done on time, basically. So there's a whole blurb here that I'm not going to read through. If I'm going to read through some of this, just bear with me. I'm going to read through some of this because I want to give you guys a window into the world of what this book will be, so you know exactly what I'm going to be presenting to you guys. 1 second, I just read something. Cool. RJ said, don't worry about it, King. We got Trill and Kapruki to be your substitute. You know what? I couldn't think of two people who I'd be more than happy for me to kind of like lay back in the cut and just hold the mantle for, you know, objective African truth, or black, I should say, melanated truth. These guys are absolutely sick with it. So yeah, cool. I'm cool. You heard that, Kapruki, Trill. If you guys see this now or later, it's on you whilst I'm writing my book. Yeah. The community is relying on you for content. Don't let them down. Oh, side note, I have also, I'm going to come back to this, but I have also just posted a link to a video that's going to live stream on a new channel that I've set up called Down with the King. Now that channel is going to be just long form interviews, because I found that I'm getting these long form interviews that are beginning to pile up now, and these are like when I have someone on the channel and we just have a 3-hour interview, and I think that deserves its own channel where people just like to hear two researchers having a conversation about a certain topic. It's almost like a podcast, so to speak. So it's like a podcast channel. So I'm putting them there. What I will do is I'll probably cut snippets from that longer podcast and then put them on the main channel if there's kind of like sound bites that I feel people need to hear. But if you want to hear the entirety in the long form, that's now going to be on the Down with the King channel. So I've put a link in, I think it's on my last community post. Please make sure that you basically, yeah, either subscribe to the channel or just at least witness the premiere, put a notification on for the premiere of that. It's tomorrow afternoon, well, tomorrow at 6 p.m. So tomorrow evening, watch that. It's an interview with Dr. Marie Charles. And I'm telling you guys right now, I've been trying to get this woman on the channel for ages. Her research is insane, totally insane. So yeah, John, you know that Down with the King, Run DMC, you done know. But yeah, sorry, her research is insane. insane. So you must watch my interview with Dr. Marie Charles. I will be posting snippets here, but I think you need to watch the full thing on the channel when that premieres tomorrow at 6 p.m. Okay. All right. Side note, let me go back to reading this. I just want to read this to you guys. So it says, Reconstructing Egypt is a work that completely revisits ancient Egypt within the context of its cultural and geolocational context as part of Africa's Nile Valley, a complex and ancient culture that, contrary to popular belief, has tremendous continuity with modern day native African populations that continue to inhabit continental Africa. And this is where it goes into it. The discipline of forensic facial reconstruction, FFR, is often implicitly trusted by the public as scientific and objective, and therefore conclusive. With most laypersons believing these illustrative imaginations produced by teams of artists, commissioned by Egyptian Department of Antiquities, are honest and agendaless, a scientific representation of the closest true likeness of the ancient individuals they depicted. However, in a paper I wrote and published in 2024 critiquing the process, I believe I successfully proved the limitations and fundamental biases that often contribute to predictable and unrealistic outcomes in most cases. In this book, we will not only explore but deconstruct these works, exposing the flaws in methodology and lack of anthropological support for such creations. We will, in response, highlight works created by alternative reconstruction artists, including myself. So by the way, this book will not only have my reconstructions, but reconstructions of other reconstruction artists like Nydia Senegal, who I trust implicitly and think their work is amazing, who are engaged in not only forensic data, but multiple branches of historiography and anthropology to produce and present much more historically robust and scientifically substantiated reconstructions of these ancient characters. These creations, which bring together art, literature, anthropometrics, anthropology, and genetics, just like we've covered in today's live stream, will cause you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about Nile Valley. So please click on the link that I left in the chat, the book launch link, and it will take you to this page. And then you have this option here to join the pre-sale, which isn't open yet, but you'll be able to set a notification. Okay, so it's important that you come here and you just click on this to notify you on the launch. And then when the launch happens, you'll be notified. What I'm probably going to do, heads up, is I'm probably going to do a live stream that goes live as soon as the launch goes live. So I'll probably put something in the diary within the next couple of days to coincide with the pre-sale launch, so we can make a bit of an event on it. Okay. And that's it. Okay. So I don't want to go on too much. I think I've given you the headline, which is new book. There's stuff you can read here. When the actual launch page opens, there's actually an excerpt from the introduction that you can read. There's just hopefully enough to keep your guys, to keep your appetites whetted and to keep you interested and to keep you, wanting to see more, because that's the whole idea here. Because when this book drops, I'm planning to, like I said, my only aim is to build on the work that the great scholars have already done and to contribute my area of contribution. This is volume 1. I imagine there'll be a revisited volume 2 where there's there's revisions and more work done to it and enhancements done to it. I can see that being the case, but this is where we are at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. Okay, it's late here. It's been a 3-hour stream, a very long one, but I hope you didn't mind the length of it, and I hope the news was worth the wait. Was the news worth the wait? Put a 1 in the chat before you go to let me know that the news was worth the wait. All right, and and we'll catch up on the next one. All right, everybody, hit up the likes, please. Okay, thank you, everybody, all of my fantastic people who donated. You are really appreciated. But everyone who's just been here like usual, contributing, making fantastic input. Oh, Zehovah, and I almost missed your donation there. thank you very much for your £2. He said, you've got to sign the first 100 books. There's actually a tier for a signed book. It's not that much more, but yes, the first 100 of all tiers is going to be heavily discounted, okay, in comparison to the ones after. So there you go. That will be available, definitely. I'd imagine if you're a patron or a member as well, you'll get a signed version regardless. So let's see that. Yeah, thank you, Zehoven, Deshawn, Wildflower. Thank you so much. A great live stream, King. Thank you. Dragar 001, thank you for your donation. And CD, thank you for your donation. Dragar gave me 2 donations. Appreciate that. Thank you, Jonathan, as always, for your donation. And Kimmy, or Kami, thank you for kicking it off with your donation. I think that's it. We'll call it a day there, guys. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for showing support in regards to my forthcoming project, which will be a book. Hope you all have a fantastic day, and yeah, probably see you soon, to be totally honest with you. Thanks a lot. Take care, and goodbye.